I am Zuri, 31 years old, and my mother was genuinely more concerned about the country club gossip than the fact that my heart was literally stopping on her imported marble floor. While I lay there fighting for a single breath of air, she stepped over my shaking body and told me to stop faking it and go clean the kitchen. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to survive a toxic family who would rather see you dead than embarrassed in front of their wealthy friends. Growing up in an exclusive suburb of Atlanta, my parents Beatrice and Marcus built their entire existence around social status and relentless perfection. They were the head of the local church board and proud legacy members of the most elite African American social organizations in the city. In their eyes, everything was a performance meant to impress their high society friends. My older brother Jamal was their undisputed golden child. He was an investment fund manager who had recently married Chloe, a woman from a supposedly old money family that my mother absolutely worshipped. It did not matter to my mother that Chloe constantly threw subtle microaggressions my way. Chloe had the right look to elevate our family image so she could do no wrong. And then there was me. 8 years ago, I dropped out of medical school. I did not drop out because I lacked ambition. I left because the crushing pressure and a terrifying undiagnosed health issue made it physically impossible for me to continue. But my family did not see a young
Hello.
woman struggling with her health. They saw a profound failure who selfishly threw away a prestigious degree. From that moment on, I was treated like a burden who was simply too lazy to measure up. What nobody in that pristine house knew was that I had been working 100-hour weeks in absolute secrecy for the past 5 years, building my own artificial intelligence platform for remote medical diagnostics. I was the hidden CEO of a company worth millions, but my family still believed I was just a broke dropout doing cheap freelance work to barely survive. Tonight was my parents' 35th wedding anniversary. The mansion was packed with hundreds of local elites mingling under massive crystal chandeliers. The air was thick with the scent of expensive catered food and floral arrangements that cost a fortune.
Like,
I
why
was
am I
wearing a
playing that?
simple but elegant emerald green dress, standing quietly near the edge of the living
They
room,
capture the
holding a
parkour.
glass of sparkling
No.
water. I was supposed to be invisible, just a prop in the background of their perfect celebration. My chest had been feeling dangerously tight all morning. I have a rare heart arrhythmia brought on by extreme stress and physical exhaustion. I had been ignoring the warning signs for days, pushing through the severe fatigue because I felt obligated to show my face at this milestone event. I thought I could just make a brief appearance, offer my congratulations, and quietly slip out the back door to go home and rest. I stood near the massive bay windows, trying to catch a cool breeze from outside, but the room felt increasingly suffocating. Chloe glided over to me with a smug smile on her face, holding a glass of champagne. She looked me up and down with that familiar condescending pity she always wore. Zuri, she purred, her voice deliberately loud enough for the nearby guests to hear. It is so brave of you to wear that dress again. I think I saw you wear it to Thanksgiving 3 years ago. If you ever need to borrow something from my closet, just ask. I know freelance web design does not really pay the bills, and we would hate for you to look out of place here. I forced a polite smile, trying to ignore the sudden sharp pain shooting down my left arm. Thank you, Chloe, I said quietly. I am perfectly fine with what I have. My brother Jamal walked up, wrapping his arm possessively around Chloe. He was wearing a custom-tailored suit that I knew he could not actually afford on his current salary. Come on, baby, do not bother Zuri. He laughed, taking a sip of his drink. She is probably just waiting for the caterers to bring
That
out the
is so
free
bad.
food so she can take some leftovers back to her apartment. They both chuckled and walked away, leaving me standing there as my vision began to severely blur. The pain in my chest suddenly intensified, twisting into a suffocating, violent knot.
Dude.
It felt like someone had dropped a concrete block directly onto my ribs. I tried to take a deep breath, but my lungs completely refused to expand. The loud jazz music and the overlapping chatter of the wealthy guests turned into a high-pitched, muffled ringing in my ears. I reached out to grab the edge of a nearby mahogany table to steady myself, but my fingers missed the wood entirely. My knees buckled beneath me, and I collapsed, hitting the cold marble floor with a heavy, sickening thud. The loud sound of my fall immediately drew the attention of the room. The music seemed to fade away into a dull
Bro,
hum,
I am
and a
not tech
circle of
support.
impeccably dressed people quickly formed around me. I was lying on my side, clutching my chest, desperately fighting for a single breath of air. The physical pain was absolutely blinding, radiating fiercely through my jaw and shooting down my spine. I looked up through my fading, blurry vision and saw my mother pushing her way through the murmuring crowd. I expected to see a mother's panic in her eyes. I expected her to drop to her knees to hold my hand to scream for someone to help her daughter.
Bro, why don't you just
Instead,
ask
Beatrice
in
stood towering over
tech
me,
support?
her face flushed with absolute rage. She did not even bend down to check my breathing. "Zuri, get up right now," she hissed, her voice a harsh, venomous whisper designed to scold me without causing a larger scene for her guests. "This is my anniversary party. I will not have you throwing a tantrum on the floor just because you want attention. Enough of this drama. Get up, march into the kitchen, and help the catering staff clean up right now." I tried to speak to tell her I was dying, but only a pathetic, raspy, wheezing sound escaped my lips. I could not move my arms. My father Marcus pushed through the crowd to stand right next to her. He looked down at me with pure, unadulterated disgust, not even bothering to set down his drink. "Stop being lazy, Zuri," he sneered casually, adjusting his expensive silk tie. "If you want to lay around all day, go back to your cheap apartment. You are making an absolute fool of yourself in front of the entire church board. Get off the floor and stop embarrassing this family." I was drowning in plain sight. The edges of my vision were rapidly fading into a terrifying pitch black. The people standing around just watched, whispering to each other behind their hands, clearly believing my parents' narrative that I was just a mentally unstable, dramatic dropout seeking desperate attention. I felt my body going completely limp. My heart was fluttering erratically in my chest, rapidly failing to pump blood to my brain. Suddenly, a man shoved his way violently through the circle of onlookers. It was Dr. Andre, a brilliant cardiologist and one of Jamal's oldest friends. He dropped to his knees right beside me, completely ignoring my mother's harsh complaints about my behavior. He placed his fingers firmly against my neck, checking for a pulse. His professional calm instantly vanished, and his face completely drained of color. "Call 911 right now," Andre yelled, his voice booming through the massive living room, shaking the very walls. "Someone get an AED. Her heart is stopping. She is going into cardiac arrest." For one single terrifying second, the entire room went completely dead silent.
Sucks.
The reality of the situation crashed over the guests, and pure panic exploded. People started shouting, dropping their expensive drinks on the marble floors, and frantically reaching for their phones. I could feel Andre tilting my head back, trying to force my airway open. But through the fading, chaotic echoes of the room, I heard the one thing that would forever change how I viewed the people who raised me. My mother grabbed Andre by the shoulder, her voice trembling not with fear for my life, but with absolute horror at the social optics. "Andre, wait," she
Extra,
pleaded,
man.
her voice tight with panic. "Do not let them turn the sirens on when they pull into the neighborhood. Please. You know how these people gossip. It will ruin our reputation if an ambulance comes blaring up to the house." I lay there on the cold marble floor, my life slipping away second by second. I was dying. My heart was literally giving out from the strain. And in my final moments of consciousness, my own mother was more worried about the country club gossip than whether her daughter would survive the night. As the darkness finally swallowed me whole, a single cold thought crystallized in my fading mind. This family would rather let me die than lose face. When I finally forced my heavy eyelids open, the blinding crystal chandeliers of my parents' mansion had been replaced by the harsh, flickering fluorescent lights of a hospital room. The sterile smell of bleach and rubbing alcohol immediately stung my nostrils. My chest felt as though it had been cracked open and stitched back together with barbed wire. The rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor beside my bed, was the only sound in
That
the
does not
room,
look
a
good.
mechanical
It's like
validation
it's
that I
buried
was
under the
actually
soil.
still alive. I tried to shift my weight against the scratchy, thin hospital sheets, but my entire body felt completely paralyzed. My mind raced back to the cold marble floor, the suffocating lack of air, and my mother begging her friends to silence the ambulance so the neighbors would not gossip. A bitter taste flooded my mouth. I had survived my
11 months
failing heart,
longer.
but waking up in this reality felt more like a punishment than a miracle. Before I could even attempt to reach over and press the call button, the heavy wooden door to my room
Yeah,
swung
this
open.
sucks.
My family marched inside, not with the frantic relief of loved ones who had nearly lost a daughter, but with the stiff, irritated posture of people who had been severely inconvenienced by a delayed flight. My mother Beatrice led the pack, her designer evening gown swapped for an impeccable cashmere twin set. My father Marcus followed closely behind with my brother Jamal and his
Wait, I
wife
have
Chloe
TNT, like,
trailing
oh
them.
my god.
Nobody rushed to
Or
my
whatever.
bedside. Nobody reached out to hold my hand or smooth the hair back from my sweaty forehead. They stood at the foot of my bed, keeping their distance, staring at me, like I was a highly disappointing
What's wrong?
museum exhibit. Chloe immediately pulled a silk handkerchief from her designer bag and pressed it delicately over her nose. She looked around the cramped, shared hospital room with absolute revulsion, taking in the scuffed linoleum floor
This is
and the
weird.
peeling paint on the walls. "It smells like illness and cheap cafeteria food in here," she murmured, her voice dripping with an elegant, calculated cruelty. "Zuri, I simply do not understand how you can stand it. If you had just applied yourself and finished medical school instead of dropping out to design cheap websites, you would probably have top-tier insurance by now. We could have placed you in a private luxury recovery suite at Emory. But I suppose this basic public ward is exactly what you get when you refuse to build a real career and expect everyone else to pity you." I stared at my sister-in-law,
This
my
is
throat too
pretty
dry
funny.
and raw from the oxygen tube they had just removed to form a complete sentence. I had literally coded on my parents' floor just hours ago, and Chloe was using my near-death experience to deliver a microaggression about my social class. My brother Jamal wrapped his arm around her waist, nodding in total agreement. "Chloe is right, Zuri." He sighed, shaking his head with a condescending smirk. "You really let yourself go. Look at this place. It is entirely depressing." My mother crossed her arms over her chest, tapping her perfectly manicured fingernails against her elbow. "Depressing is an understatement." Beatrice snapped, her eyes narrowing. "Do you have any earthly idea what you put us through last night, Zuri? We had the mayor, the district attorney, and half of the country club board in our living room. We were just about to cut the anniversary cake when you decided to collapse and create an absolute spectacle. Mrs. Henderson was watching you thrash on the floor. It took me 30 minutes to calm the guests down after the paramedics wheeled you out. You completely ruined our 35th anniversary toast with your selfish behavior." The sheer absurdity of her complaint ignited a small spark of heat in my chest, pushing past the intense physical pain. "I had a severe cardiac episode, Mom." I whispered, my voice raspy and weak, but laced with total disbelief. My heart stopped beating. "I could have died right there in your house." My father stepped forward, placing both hands on the metal railing at the foot of my bed. His face was a mask of cold, unforgiving authority. "Stop with the dramatic victim narrative, Zuri," he commanded harshly. "You brought this entirely on yourself. You eat poorly, you do not exercise, and you sit hunched over a
Oh.
computer all day doing gig work because you refuse to enter the real corporate world. We are entirely done coddling your lack of ambition, and we are certainly not footing the bill for your theatrics.
Oh.
You are a grown woman.
Okay.
Whatever this little hospital stunt costs is entirely your responsibility. We will not be bailing you out this time." I closed my eyes, taking a slow, painful breath. I did not need them to bail me out. My secret tech company, Aura Health, had just surpassed $20 million in valuation the previous week.
Nothing.
I had more liquid capital in my personal accounts than my father had in his entire exaggerated investment portfolio. But they did not know that. They still thought I was entirely dependent on their scraps. Before I could formulate a response, the door opened again. A nurse wearing blue scrubs walked in carrying a thick clipboard. She paused, glancing uncomfortably at the tense formation of my family members surrounding my bed. "Excuse me," the nurse said politely, but with a tight smile. "I am glad to see you are awake, Miss Zuri. The doctor will be in shortly to discuss your discharge plan and your ongoing cardiology
What?
referrals. However, the billing department needs to finalize your intake paperwork. Because you required emergency resuscitation, an ambulance transport, and immediate cardiac stabilization, the current total for your admission sits at $85,000. Chloe let out a sharp, mocking laugh, tossing her perfect blonde hair over her shoulder. $85,000, she repeated, shaking her head in amusement. Well, Zuri, you better start designing a whole lot of cheap websites to pay that off. My mother sighed loudly, massaging her temples as if my medical emergency was giving her a severe migraine. I looked directly at the nurse, forcing myself to sit up slightly, despite the screaming pain in my ribs. Just run the insurance card on my file, I told her confidently. I am still listed as a dependent under the primary family health plan. I pay my premium portion to my father on the first of every single month without fail. The nurse shifted her weight, looking down at the paperwork on her clipboard. Her expression turned deeply sympathetic, which immediately made my stomach drop. "Miss Zuri, we did attempt to process that policy upon your arrival," she explained softly. "But the system rejected the claim. The insurance provider stated that the policy for your specific name was officially terminated over 4 weeks ago. You currently have absolutely no medical coverage." The room went dead silent. I stared at the nurse, my mind struggling to process her words. Terminated. That was entirely impossible. I had personally transferred $700 to my father's bank account just last week to cover my portion of the premium. I turned my head slowly to look at my father. Marcus stood there completely unfazed. He did not look guilty. He did not look ashamed. He looked me dead in the eyes with absolute chilling indifference. "Dad," I said, my voice trembling with a mixture of shock and rising fury. "What is she talking about? I sent you the money. Why is my insurance canceled?" My father straightened his posture, adjusting his gold cufflinks. He cleared his throat, speaking with the casual, dismissive tone of a man discussing the weather. "I canceled your coverage last month, Zuri," he stated flatly. "The premiums were getting astronomically high, and your mother and I required the extra funds. The country club opened up a new exclusive platinum tier for legacy members. We needed to upgrade our membership to maintain our social standing among the board directors. You are a grown woman playing on the internet for pennies. You should have figured out your own private health care by now instead of leeching off our family plan." The air was completely sucked out of my lungs, and this time it had absolutely nothing to do with my heart condition. The sheer calculated cruelty of his words hit me with the force of a freight train. He had taken my money. He had accepted my premium payment every single month, knowing full well he had left me completely uninsured. He had knowingly exposed me to medical bankruptcy just so he and my mother could drink better champagne and play golf on a more exclusive course. He watched me code on his living room floor, knowing I had no safety net to fall back on. Chloe smirked, checking her reflection in the dark screen of her phone. "Well," she chimed in cheerfully, "I suppose you will just have to declare bankruptcy, Zuri. It is not the
Dude,
end
like
of the world for someone who already has nothing to
I got
lose."
2
A
foot and I didn't
quiet,
pick
burning
either one up.
fire ignited deep in my chest, spreading
So
rapidly
stupid.
through my veins. For 8 long years, I had let them speak to me like I was dirt beneath their shoes. I had let them parade their fake wealth around while I worked myself to the bone in silence. I had swallowed my pride and stayed quiet to keep the fragile peace of this toxic family. But lying in that hospital bed, looking at the faces of
good.
people who would gladly let me die uninsured just to line their own pockets, the very last shred of my familial loyalty completely evaporated into thin air. My vision sharpened, focusing on the 4 people standing around my hospital bed with a new chilling clarity. The lingering fog of the cardiac arrest and the heavy painkillers vanished completely, replaced by an ice-cold, absolute resolve. I looked at my mother's annoyed tapping foot, my father's indifferent sneer, Chloe's smug satisfaction, and finally my brother Jamal. He was watching me closely, with a predatory gleam in his eyes that I had never quite recognized until this very second. He stepped forward, clearing his throat, and unbuttoned his custom suit jacket. He reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a thick stapled stack of legal documents, tossing them carelessly onto my lap. "Since you clearly cannot manage your own life, Zuri, I am going to step in and fix this massive mess for you." Jamal stated, his voice coated in that slick, persuasive tone he usually reserved for his wealthy investment clients. "I know you are panicking about the $85,000 medical bill. Dad is right, you cannot afford it, and they will absolutely send collectors after you. But because I actually care about this family's reputation, I had my lawyers draft these up first thing this morning." I looked down at the bold black letters printed across the top page. Power of attorney. I did not touch the papers. I just stared at them and then slowly lifted my gaze back to my brother. "What exactly is this, Jamal?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "It is a simple legal authorization," he replied, waving his hand dismissively as if the details were beneath him. "It grants me temporary control over your finances. I am going to personally secure a loan to cover your hospital bills, so you do not get dragged into bankruptcy court and humiliate us further. The bank just needs some collateral to approve the funds." "Collateral," I repeated, letting the word hang heavily in the sterile hospital air. "And what collateral would that be, considering you all think I'm completely broke?" "Your apartment," Beatrice chimed in, taking a step closer to the bed. Her eyes were hard and calculating. "Jamal is doing you a massive favor, Zuri. He is going to use that shabby little apartment of yours to secure the loan. You will sign the property deed over to his holding company temporarily, of course, just until the debt is paid off. It is the only practical solution. You should be thanking your brother on your knees for bailing you out of this disaster. You have been spiraling completely out of control
I'm
ever
not the
since
same
you threw
dude.
away your medical degree 8 years ago," Marcus added, crossing his arms over his chest. His voice was heavy with decades of weaponized disappointment. 8 years ago, you had the world at your feet. You were enrolled in one of the top medical programs in the country, and you threw it all away because you claimed you were too sick and too stressed. We all know the truth. You simply lack the discipline. You lack the fundamental drive to succeed. You have been a colossal, embarrassing failure ever since hiding away in that cramped little apartment doing God knows what on your computer. You are incapable of making sound adult decisions, Zuri. Sign the papers and let your brother handle the heavy lifting." The sheer audacity of their manipulation was breathtaking. They were using my deepest trauma, the absolute darkest period of my life, as a weapon to beat me into submission. When I dropped out of medical school 8 years ago, I was suffering from the early stages of my heart condition. I was passing out in the library, my hair was falling out, and I was severely underweight. I begged them for support, but they told me I was just being weak. They cut me off financially and emotionally, forcing me to navigate my chronic illness entirely alone. But their cruel remarks about my past were not the most revealing part of this conversation. It was the apartment. The shabby little apartment they kept referencing was not a rental. It was a massive pre-war condo located in the absolute heart of Midtown. It was left exclusively to me by my grandmother, Nana Evelyn, before she passed away. Nana was the only person in this family who ever showed me unconditional love, and she knew exactly how greedy and status-obsessed my parents were. She deliberately bypassed Marcus and Beatrice in her will, placing the property solely in my name to ensure I would always have a safe haven. My parents had been absolutely furious. They tried to contest the will back then but failed miserably. Over the past 8 years, the neighborhood had gentrified massively. That supposedly rundown apartment was now a prime piece of luxury real estate worth easily over $2 million. And Jamal, being a ruthless investment fund manager, knew exactly what it was worth. I looked down at the power of attorney document again. I am a CEO of a highly successful tech company. I negotiate complex software contracts and navigate corporate law on a daily basis. It took me less than 10 seconds of scanning the first page to see the trap. This was not a temporary agreement to secure a medical loan, The document granted Jamal irrevocable permanent control over my real estate assets, my bank accounts, and my medical directives. It gave his holding company the absolute right to sell, transfer, or liquidate my property without my secondary consent. They did not care about
Yeah,
saving me
what?
from medical
Already,
debt. They did not care that I had nearly died on their marble floor. They had actively canceled my health insurance, hoping a crisis would eventually force my hand. They orchestrated this entire situation to strip me of the very last thing they thought I owned. Jamal was using an $85,000 hospital bill as a cheap Trojan horse to legally steal a $2 million property. Chloe sighed loudly, inspecting her nails. Honestly, Zuri, stop reading it like you actually understand the legal jargon, she mocked. Jamal brought a pen. Just sign the line and we can all get out of this depressing room. I have a spa appointment at noon, and this whole ordeal is terribly draining. Jamal stepped
How do you
right
figure
up
a
to the
wall
edge of the
layout?
bed,
Bro, I
reaching
have
into
no
his
idea
inner
how the wall
pocket.
works. I just
He pulled out a
downloaded it.
sleek,
Like,
heavy silver
I actually
fountain
have
pen and
no
held it
idea how to
out
set
to
that
me.
up.
His smile was predatory, a wolf cornering a wounded animal. Just sign it, Zuri, he urged softly. Let the adults take care of everything. You can go back to playing on your computer, and we will make sure the bad, scary debt collectors do not come after you. I slowly reached out my hand, trembling slightly from the lingering physical weakness of my cardiac arrest. I took the heavy silver pen from his fingers. I saw my mother's shoulders drop in relief. I saw my father nod with grim satisfaction. I saw Chloe smirk. They thought they had won. They thought they had finally broken the
Yeah, it's
failure of the
CQ. It's
family,
just a
perfectly
wall.
exploiting her moment of absolute physical
Um,
vulnerability to take the last valuable
where?
thing she possessed. I looked at the signature line printed at the bottom of the crisp white page. I pressed the tip of the silver pen against the paper, and then I stopped. I slowly lifted my head, zooming my focus in on Jamal's eager, greedy eyes.
Wait,
A cold, hard smile
where I saw
stretched across my
something.
face, completely devoid of any warmth or submission. I did not
I
say
think
a
I'm
single
tripping.
word. I simply dropped the expensive silver
If my
pen, allowing it
crosshair
to
for
clatter
download,
loudly onto the scuffed
I have it
linoleum floor.
download
I
like
grabbed the thick stack of legal documents with both
on my
hands. With
PC.
a sharp, violent motion, I ripped the entire stack straight down the middle. The sound of tearing paper echoed like a gunshot in the sterile hospital room. My mother gasped, taking a shocked step backward. Chloe's jaw dropped open. Marcus stiffened, his eyes widening in pure disbelief. Jamal's smug, predatory smile instantly vanished, replaced by a furious dark purple flush that crept up his neck. I gathered the torn halves, placed them together, and ripped them again, shredding his perfectly crafted legal trap into worthless confetti. I let the pieces fall like snow over my hospital blanket. What the hell are you doing? Jamal exploded, lunging forward to grab the torn pieces, as if he could somehow magically tape them back together. Are you completely insane? I am not the weak, sick little dropout you think I am. Jamal, I said, my voice ringing with an icy, authoritative
Is
clarity that made
RSG
him
less
freeze in
fun
his
than rank?
tracks. You
If
really
you think
thought you could
so.
use my canceled health
I don't know.
insurance to extort a
Depends
$2 million
on
property out of me? You think I do not know
the
exactly
person.
what this power of attorney actually says? You are not trying to save me. You are trying to rob me blind while I am lying in a hospital bed. You ungrateful little brat, my father roared, slamming his hand against the metal bedrail. We are offering you a lifeline. You have absolutely nothing. You have no insurance, no real job, and no future. You will sign those papers or we will leave you here to rot under a mountain of debt. I looked at the people who were supposed to be my family. The illusion was completely shattered. There was no more hoping for their approval, no more craving their love, and absolutely no more hiding my reality to protect their fragile egos. I reached over to the bedside table and picked up my personal cell phone, unlocking the screen. I do not need your lifeline, Dad, I stated, staring him down with unwavering intensity. I do not need your insurance, and I certainly do not need this family anymore. You wanted to know what I have been doing on my computer for the last 8 years. Let me show you exactly how much of a failure I really am. Jamal let out a loud, harsh bark of laughter that echoed off the sterile walls. He took a step back, crossing his arms over his chest while shaking his head in mock pity. You are completely delusional, Zuri. Do you honestly think tearing up a piece of paper magically erases your reality? You owe $85,000. You do not have a dime to your name. The hospital is not going to just let you walk out of here. They are going to send you to collections. They are going to garnish your pathetic little freelance wages until you are 60 years old. You will lose that apartment anyway, but by the time the bank is done with you, your credit will be permanently destroyed. My mother! Beatrice chimed in, her voice dripping with secondhand embarrassment. This is exactly why we cannot bring you anywhere nice. You live in a fantasy world. Stop this embarrassing performance right now and apologize to your brother. He is trying to save you from absolute ruin, and you are throwing a childish tantrum. I did not argue.
I probably
I
reached
did not
3
raise my voice or
million
try to
resets
explain
now.
myself. I was entirely done explaining myself to people who
Or
were
I saw it
committed
was
to
like
misunderstanding me.
2.9
Moving with a slow,
yesterday,
deliberate
so
calmness, I reached over to the rolling bedside tray
yeah.
where the paramedics had placed my personal belongings, including the small velvet clutch I had been holding when I collapsed. I pressed the red call button pinned to my bedsheet. Within moments, the heavy door swung open and the hospital billing administrator stepped inside. She was a stern-looking woman in a crisp gray blazer holding a mobile payment terminal and looking highly impatient with the crowd in my room. "Excuse me," I said, keeping my voice even and polite. "I would like to settle my account balance in full right now so we can process my discharge paperwork." My father, Marcus, let out a sharp, derisive snort. "Please excuse my daughter," he told the administrator, waving his hand dismissively. "She is heavily medicated and clearly not thinking
Uh,
straight. We are still arranging the financing for her treatment." I ignored him completely, keeping my eyes locked on the administrator. I snapped open the gold clasp of my velvet clutch. I bypassed my standard debit cards and reached into the hidden back pocket, pulling out a thick, heavy piece of matte black titanium. It was an exclusive invitation, only card issued strictly to ultra-high net worth individuals. It carried no spending limit and required a multi-million-dollar baseline just to maintain the account. I had received it 3 years ago after my tech company secured its Series B funding round. I extended my hand holding the heavy metal card out to the administrator. "The balance is $85,000 correct. Please run it." Jamal, who worked in high-level wealth management, knew exactly what that card was the
what?
second
Like
the
I cannot
fluorescent
build a
hospital
portal there.
lights hit its distinctive matte
It's like
finish.
not happening.
The arrogant smirk vanished from his face so fast, it was as if he had been physically struck. His eyes widened to the size of saucers, and his jaw practically unhinged. "Wait," Jamal stammered, taking a sudden step toward the bed, his eyes glued to the metal card in my hand. "That is an exclusive black card. Zuri, where did you get that? Whose name is on that card?" "Mine," I replied smoothly. "That is impossible," Chloe scoffed, stepping up beside her husband. Her eyes darted nervously between the card and my face. "She is lying, Jamal. It is probably a fake. Or one of those prepaid debit cards she painted black to look important. Just let the machine decline it so we can end this ridiculous charade." The billing administrator looked skeptical, but she took the heavy card from
I've
my
completed
hand
0
and
runs
slid the
today,
chip
bro.
into the mobile terminal. She typed in the massive $85,000 charge. The machine paused. The room went so quiet, you could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning vent above us. My parents watched with bated breath, fully expecting the machine to flash a bright red decline warning. They were waiting for my ultimate humiliation. Instead, the machine let out a cheerful, sharp beep. Approved. A long stream of receipt paper began printing from the top of the terminal. The sound of the printing receipt seemed to echo endlessly in the silent room. The administrator's entire demeanor shifted instantly from impatient skepticism to absolute profound respect. She carefully tore off the receipt and handed it to me along with a pen. "Your payment has been successfully processed in full, Miss Zuri," she said, her tone remarkably deferential. "I will have the attending physician prepare your discharge papers immediately." "Thank you." I signed the receipt with a quick flourish and handed it back. As the administrator left the room, the heavy wooden door clicked shut behind her, sealing my family inside with a reality they could not comprehend. "Let me see that," Jamal demanded. Before I could stop him, he snatched the customer copy of the receipt from my bedside table. He stared at the printed paper, his eyes darting frantically across the text, as if searching for a typo. He looked at the approval code. He looked at the remaining available balance, which was simply listed as unlimited. Then he looked at the name printed clearly at the top. Zuri Evelyn Marcus. His hand began to visibly shake. "This is a real transaction," he whispered, his voice entirely hollow. "It actually went through. $85,000 paid in a single swipe." My mother staggered backward, bumping into the visitor chair.
Like, what is
Her
that
hand
bash
flew to
chain,
her
bro?
chest,
Why is
clutching
it
her
in
pearl
the freaking
necklace.
basalt again?
"What kind of illegal trouble are you in, Zuri?" she demanded, her voice rising in sheer panic.
Oh,
"Where did you get that kind of money? Have you been stealing? Are you involved in fraud? If you bring
my
the
clothes.
FBI to our doorstep and ruin your father's reputation, I will never forgive you." My father's face was the mask of furious confusion. He pointed an accusing finger at me. "You have been living in a cheap apartment, pretending to be a broke
Double
dropout for 8 years.
It's like a weather
Explain
double
yourself
triple.
right now. Who are you stealing from?" I looked at the four of them standing there, completely unraveling, because their carefully constructed hierarchy had just been destroyed. They were so deeply committed to viewing me as a failure that they genuinely believed I must be a criminal before they would ever believe I was a success. "I am not stealing from anyone. Dad," I said, my voice steady and cold. "I built a medical technology platform. I sold the licensing rights to 3 major hospital networks across the country. I am the CEO of a company that is currently valued at over $20 million. I did not drop out of medical school to be lazy. I dropped out because I realized I could fix the broken medical system on a macro level, while you all sat around calling me a failure." "You are lying!" Chloe snapped, stepping out from behind
Wait,
Jamal.
what? It's not?
Her perfect porcelain face was contorted with ugly, vicious jealousy. "People like you do not
Like,
just secretly
this
build tech
fun, I think.
empires. You are a broke, sick dropout. You do not even know how to dress for a country club dinner, and you expect us to believe you are a millionaire CEO. "I do not expect you
Dude,
to
I don't
believe
know which
anything,
way it
Chloe,"
is.
I replied, locking eyes with her. "And frankly, I do not care if you do. But I am paying my own bills.
What?
I am keeping my own apartment, and I am walking out of this hospital without owing a single cent to any of you. You tried to trap me. You tried to steal my only safety net while my heart was literally failing. So you can take your fake concern, your power of attorney, and your elitist judgment and get the hell out of my
Dude,
room."
this makes no
For the first
sense.
time in my entire life, I watched my parents stand in complete, stunned silence. They had no
Alright,
script
that
for
way.
this. They had no harsh lectures prepared for a daughter who did not need their money, their approval,
this
or their social
diagonal.
standing. Jamal stared at the ripped shreds of the power of attorney documents scattered across my bedsheet, finally realizing exactly what he had just lost.
I wish I got
He had
20
tried to
obby,
steal
but
a $2
sure.
million condo from a woman who could buy and sell his entire investment portfolio before breakfast. "Get out," I commanded, pointing toward the door. My father grabbed my mother's arm tightly, dragging her toward the exit. Jamal followed, his head spinning as he repeatedly glanced back at me as if trying to solve a complex math equation. But Chloe lingered near the door for a fraction of a second longer. Her eyes narrowed, scanning my face with toxic, malicious intent. In Chloe's elitist old money worldview, a black woman who dropped out of school and lived in the working class part of town simply did not earn a black card through legitimate hard work. She did not believe my story about a tech company for a single second. To her, there was only one logical explanation for a young woman possessing that kind of sudden, unlimited wealth. She assumed I was a sugar baby.
Rods.
She assumed I was being funded by a wealthy older man or laundering money for a criminal enterprise. Chloe turned on her designer heel and marched out into the hallway, letting the heavy door slam shut.
114.
As she walked furiously down the hospital corridor, she reached into her expensive handbag and pulled out her phone. Her fingers flew across the screen, opening a hidden encrypted messaging app she used to communicate with her wealthy family's private fixer. She typed out a message with vicious speed. "I need a full background check on my sister-in-law, Zuri Marcus. Bank records, shell companies, hidden assets, everything.
That.
Find out what old rich man is funding her or what illegal scam she is running.
That.
I want proof that she is a fraud by the end of the week." Let us see how smug she is when I expose her dirty secrets to the entire
Okay.
city. The crisp morning air
Okay,
stung my
bro.
lungs as I stepped out of the hospital, sliding into the back of a waiting
Thank you,
town
Big
car.
Bat, for the tier
My
1.
chest still
Appreciate it.
throbbed from the resuscitation, and the heavy hospital bandages felt like a tight cage against my ribs. But my mind was running at 1,000 miles a minute. I just needed to get back to my apartment. I needed the quiet sanctuary of Nana Evelyn's high
Okay, well, like, what
ceilings,
are these?
the
Oh
familiar
my
smell of
god,
old
what are...
books, and the
Yeah, I'm gonna
secure
check and then
servers in
reset.
my home office. I
Oh,
needed to
3
call
for
my chief
17, like...
operating officer
Yeah,
and
that's
lock
pretty
down my
normal.
company assets before Chloe's promised private investigator could start digging around and causing unnecessary corporate panic. The
I'm
town
just gonna
car
see if it
pulled
can
up to
get
my
any
classic
worse,
pre-war
honestly.
building in Midtown. I tipped the driver and walked through the ornate brass doors. The lobby was quiet. I took the elevator to the penthouse floor, the gentle hum of the machinery doing little to settle the strange, uneasy feeling crawling up the back of my neck.
3 for 18.
My instincts were screaming at
4
me.
for 19.
Something felt entirely wrong. I
4 for
reached my
20.
heavy mahogany
4 for
front door and
21.
pulled my antique brass key from my
Yeah, I
purse.
give up.
I slid it into the lock and turned, but it jammed. I jiggled the handle and pushed the key harder. It refused to catch. The familiar mechanism had been completely replaced. A shiny new silver deadbolt sat where the antique brass had been. Before I could process the violation, the heavy door swung inward. Jamal stood in the entryway. His tie loosened his sleeves, rolled up to the elbows, holding a mug of my expensive imported coffee. He looked entirely too comfortable lounging in the foyer of a home he had previously mocked as a depressing, run-down shack. Behind him, sitting on Nana Evelyn's priceless velvet sofa, were my parents. Marcus was casually flipping through a financial magazine while Beatrice inspected the antique vases on the mantel with a critical sneer. "What are you doing in my house?" I demanded, stepping over the threshold. My voice was steady, but a cold fury was already rising in my throat. "How did you get in here?" Jamal took a slow sip of his coffee, blocking the hallway. "It is not your house anymore, Zuri," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "You are trespassing on a sealed property." I pushed past him, walking into the center of my own living room. "You are completely out of your mind," I snapped, looking at my father. "Get out of my apartment right now before I call the police." Marcus calmly closed his magazine and set it on the glass coffee table. "The police are already here, Zuri," he stated calmly. As if on cue, 2 uniformed police officers stepped out from my kitchen. They looked uncomfortable, but their posture was strictly professional. My heart skipped a beat, but I forced myself to remain perfectly still. "Officers, I am the sole owner of this property," I said, turning to them and keeping my hands visible. "These people broke into my home and changed the locks while I was in the hospital. I want them removed immediately." The older
If I
officer
get Dawn...
sighed, shifting his weight. "I am sorry, Miss Marcus, but we cannot do that," he said, pulling a thick, folded document from his utility belt. "Your brother provided us with a certified court order signed by a judge at 8 o'clock this morning. We are here to enforce a temporary emergency conservatorship. You have been legally barred from entering this premises."
26.
The word dropped like a physical weight into the room. Conservatorship.
That's
Jamal
too
walked
far.
up behind me, his smugness
I see a
radiating through the
fort.
air.
There has to be
"You
a
really thought
bastion
you
that
could
led
wave a
to...
stolen black card
I
in
don't
our
know.
faces and just walk away?" He chuckled softly. "I told you, Zuri.
I just
I
can't
am a
get there
wealth
very
management
quickly.
attorney. I know exactly how to handle massive financial irregularities. When a chronically unemployed, mentally unstable medical school dropout suddenly produces a card with unlimited funds, it triggers a lot of alarm bells." I turned to face him, my nails digging into the palms of my hands.
Lucky.
"I am the CEO of Aura Health," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "My wealth is entirely legitimate, and you know it." Jamal laughed, a sharp, mocking sound. "You are delusional, Zuri. You suffered a major cardiac event, you lacked oxygen to the brain, and you experienced a severe psychotic break. You hallucinated a tech empire to cope with the reality of being a complete failure." He leaned in closer, lowering his voice so the officers could not hear. "Or maybe you are running a massive wire fraud scam. Either way, I went to a judge last night. I submitted your medical records from 8 years ago when you dropped out of school claiming severe stress and anxiety. I submitted the hospital reports from yesterday showing your cardiac arrest. And I filed an emergency ex parte motion declaring you an incapacitated adult who poses an immediate danger to herself and her own finances. He smiled, tapping the breast pocket of his suit. The judge granted me temporary conservatorship. All of your bank accounts are frozen. Your credit cards are suspended. This property has been placed under my legal
Oh,
management
ate
pending a
salmon?
full psychiatric
Useful.
evaluation. You have absolutely nothing. The sheer calculated evil of his plan was staggering. He could not legally steal the apartment with a power of attorney, so he weaponized the legal system to declare me legally incompetent. He was using the very real trauma of my past medical struggles to paint me as an insane woman stealing money. The commotion in my living room had grown loud enough to attract attention. The heavy oak door was still propped open, and I could see several of my affluent neighbors peering out into the hallway. Mrs. Higgins, a wealthy retired opera singer who lived across the hall, stepped out, pulling her silk robe tighter around her shoulders. "Is everything all right over there?" Mrs. Higgins called out, her eyes darting nervously toward the police officers. Beatrice instantly sprang into action. The transformation was terrifying. In a fraction of a second, her cold, calculating sneer melted into a mask of pure maternal agony. She rushed to the doorway, clasping her hands together against her chest and letting out a loud, theatrical sob. "Oh, Clara, it is just awful!" Beatrice cried out to the neighbor, tears actively spilling down her perfectly powdered cheeks. "It is my poor, sick daughter. She has been severely depressed ever since she failed out of medical school. We tried so hard to help
Dude,
her, but
I
she
almost did
refuses to
burn.
take her medication. She had a terrible mental breakdown yesterday. She has been stealing money and telling people she runs a billion-dollar company. She simply cannot control her behavior anymore. We had to get the
Bro, the
courts
best run for
involved
today
just to
is
save her
awful.
from herself. It breaks a mother's
I'm
heart
not
to
getting
see her own
anything.
child lose her mind." Mrs. Higgins gasped, pressing a hand to her mouth in shock and casting a look of deep pity toward me. The other neighbors murmured in the hallway, shaking their heads at the tragic spectacle. Beatrice buried her face in her hands, leaning against Marcus, who wrapped a comforting
I guess
arm around
earlier I
her,
had a
playing the role of the exhausted, steadfast
750
patriarch
something
perfectly.
undenter, and then
They
it
were putting on a
decides to
masterclass
hard
in
zero
public
and it's later.
manipulation. They were gaslighting me in front of my own community, painting me as a tragic, insane criminal while they played the heartbroken saviors. Miss Marcus, the younger police officer, said, stepping forward and gesturing toward the open door, "We really need you to vacate the premises. The court order is clear. You are not allowed to be here until the conservatorship hearing takes place next month.
No, I'm not playing
If you
around.
refuse to leave, we will have no choice but to arrest you for trespassing and violation of a court order." I looked at the officers. They were just doing their jobs following the signature of a judge who had been entirely misled by my brother's fabricated evidence. If I fought them, I would be arrested. If I screamed and yelled, I would only prove Beatrice's point that I was unhinged and out of control. They wanted me to break. They wanted me to throw a hysterical fit to validate the conservatorship. I took a slow, deep breath, forcing my heart rate to steady. I looked around the apartment, taking in Nana Evelyn's Persian rugs, the beautiful artwork I had carefully collected, and the home I had built with my own 2 hands. "I will leave," I told the officers, my voice calm and perfectly modulated. "I will not cause any trouble." Jamal stepped into my personal space as I walked toward the door. He leaned
Bro,
his head down until his mouth
that's
was
what you
hovering
think.
right next to my ear.
But
His
it could
breath
take
smelled of my expensive coffee.
years.
"I told you not to play games with me, Zuri," he whispered, his voice dripping with pure toxic malice. "You are completely locked out of your own life. You have no money, no house, and no
I would be
credibility.
really lucky
You are a
if I
crazy, sick girl who steals
got a
credit
world
cards.
record, like,
You will
soon.
never beat a lawyer like me in a courtroom. You are going to crawl back to us begging for an allowance, and when you do, I am going to sell this apartment right out from
Like,
under
that's
you."
like that would be
I
like
stopped
luckier than
walking.
Loki.
I turned my head slightly
Maybe.
so I was looking directly into his arrogant,
And
dark
Loki got
eyes.
like pretty
I
dang
did not
lucky.
scream. I did not cry. I did not show a single ounce of the fear or desperation he was so desperately hoping to see. Instead, a slow, dark
The
half
day
smile
he
crept
played for like
across my
2
face.
weeks.
It was a cold, calculating smirk that made Jamal physically flinch and take a half step backward. He expected a victim. He expected a broken woman. He did not expect the CEO of a $20 million tech empire who had spent the last 8 years outsmarting corporate sharks 10 times his size. "You are right, Jamal," I whispered back, my tone matching his deadly quietness. "You are a lawyer. But you clearly forgot how to do basic corporate due diligence before you perjured yourself in front of a judge." I turned my back on him and walked out the door, stepping past my mother's fake sobbing and the pitying stares of my neighbors. I walked down the hallway toward the elevator, the heavy thud of the locks engaging behind me, echoing in the corridor. I had no access to my home, and my personal bank accounts were temporarily frozen. But Jamal had made one catastrophic, fatal error in his grand legal scheme. Aura Health was not registered under my name. It was registered under a blind corporate trust in Delaware, and my corporate legal team was the most ruthless firm on the Eastern Seaboard. Jamal thought he had trapped a mouse, but he had just locked himself in a cage with a lion. I stepped out of the pre-war building, and the crisp Atlanta breeze immediately cooled my flushed skin. My parents and my brother expected me to wander the streets aimlessly, broken and destitute, crying over the sudden loss of my home and my freedom. Instead, I pulled my phone from my coat pocket and sent a single encrypted text message. Less than 2 minutes later, a pristine black Mercedes Maybach glided smoothly to a halt at the curb. The uniformed driver stepped out instantly, opening the heavy rear door with a respectful nod. I slid into the plush leather interior, leaving the sidewalk, the fake tears, and my toxic family far behind in the rearview mirror. The Maybach navigated the bustling downtown Atlanta traffic with practiced ease, eventually pulling into the highly secure underground garage of a towering 60-story glass skyscraper. This was not a rented co-working space or a humble startup incubator. This was the global headquarters of Aura Health. I stepped into the private executive elevator, pressing my thumb against the biometric scanner panel. The digital display chimed a soft confirmation, and the car launched upward, seamlessly rocketing toward the penthouse level. As the floor numbers ticked higher on the display screen, I allowed myself a rare, quiet moment of reflection. My parents and siblings had spent the last 8 years aggressively spinning a narrative about my tragic downfall. They told their wealthy country club friends that I was a fragile, massive disappointment who buckled under the intense academic pressure of medical school. They painted themselves as the long-suffering victims of my sudden lack of ambition. The truth was entirely different. During my 3rd year of clinical rotations, I had discovered a catastrophic flaw in how major hospital networks managed and shared patient data. The archaic, fragmented legacy systems were not just inefficient, they were actively costing lives due to medical errors and delayed treatments. I did not drop out of my medical program because I was too weak to handle the stress or because I lacked discipline. I dropped out because I spent 3 sleepless weeks coding a predictive machine learning algorithm that completely revolutionized medical data optimization. I locked myself in my grandmother's apartment for years, not because I was depressed, but because I was fiercely, quietly building an empire from the ground up. I disguised my ownership through Delaware blind trusts and a complex labyrinth of corporate holding companies. I wanted absolute peace to work, and more importantly, I wanted to see exactly how my family would treat me when they firmly believed I had absolutely nothing to offer them. Back in the hospital room, I had tossed out the $20 million valuation just to watch them squirm. That number was nothing but a tiny fraction of my latest quarterly revenue from a single mid-tier licensing contract. Aura Health had surpassed unicorn status 2 full years ago. My company was officially valued at over $1.2 billion. And Jamal, the hotshot wealth manager, had just committed perjury to claim legal conservatorship over a woman who could buy his entire investment firm with her pocket change. The elevator doors parted, revealing a sprawling, ultra-modern office space buzzing with quiet, brilliant energy. Senior analysts and tech executives nodded respectfully as I walked past their glass-walled suites. I pushed open the double oak doors to my corner office, taking in the breathtaking panoramic view of the Atlanta skyline. My executive assistant Elena was already waiting by my massive desk, holding a sleek tablet and a fresh cup of artisan tea. Elena was a brilliant, ruthless operative who managed my life with military precision. "Welcome back, boss." She greeted me with a sharp, professional smile. "I am glad you are feeling better. I have already initiated the lockdown
Like
on your
no
minor decoy
pearls.
bank accounts. Your brother will find exactly $4,000 in a checking account to satisfy his newly minted conservatorship. The blind trust is fully shielding your corporate shares and real estate portfolio." "Excellent," I replied, taking a sip of the tea and sinking into my leather executive chair. Let him play financial guardian over an empty wallet. "What else do you have for me, Elena?" Elena swiped her tablet screen, bringing up a highly classified financial dossier and pushing it across the desk toward me. "We have fully audited Jamal's private investment firm, just as you requested," she
14,
reported, her
like,
voice
what am I gonna
dropping
do
to a
with that?
precise clinical tone. "It turns out your brother's massive success is just as fake as his concern for your health. His primary hedge fund is severely overleveraged and hemorrhaging capital at an alarming rate. He made a series of catastrophic bets on commercial real estate last quarter." I leaned forward, scanning the highlighted red numbers on the screen. "So, he is broke." "Worse than broke," Elena corrected, a wicked gleam appearing in her eyes. To maintain his luxury cars, his expensive country club memberships, and to frantically hide the massive losses from his wealthy investors, Jamal quietly took out a high-interest shadow loan. He borrowed $15 million to keep his firm afloat.
If only I
I
got
raised an
stuff.
eyebrow, tapping my manicured nail against the desk. "And who was foolish enough to lend him $15 million without proper due diligence?" Elena smiled, her expression pure ice. "He secured the loan through Apex Capital Holdings," she stated smoothly. I froze, staring at the tablet. Apex Capital Holdings was a subsidiary firm I had established 4 years ago to manage my aggressive corporate acquisitions. Jamal had absolutely no idea that Apex Capital was one of my primary corporate shell companies. He essentially bypassed traditional banking security and borrowed the money directly from my hidden portfolio. Jamal signed a binding predatory contract because he was desperate. Elena continued, tapping a specific clause on the digital document. "The entire $15 million principal plus interest is due in full by next Friday. If he defaults, we have the explicit legal right to liquidate his firm, seize his personal assets, and initiate criminal fraud proceedings for the falsified documents he used to secure the cash. He has absolutely no way to pay it back." I turned my chair slightly, looking out through the floor-to-ceiling windows at the sprawling city below. My brother had stood in my apartment just an hour ago, mocking me, calling me crazy, and threatening to sell my home out from under me. He truly believed he held all the power. He had no idea that I held the leash to his entire existence. "Do not alert him yet,"
That was actually a perfect
I
pearl.
instructed Elena, keeping my eyes fixed on the horizon. "Let him enjoy his fake victory for a few more days. Let him parade around the country club, telling my parents how he heroically stepped in to manage my
this
tragic
because
life.
I know.
Prepare the liquidation
That's having a
papers
lot of fun
and
in
have
this
our legal
fashion.
team on standby. When Friday arrives, we are going to collect every single cent he owes us." I turned away from the floor-to-ceiling
Wait,
glass, the
I
setting Atlanta
freaking-
sun
wait, undo.
casting long golden shadows
Wait.
across my sprawling office. Moving with a deliberate, unhurried grace, I walked over to the sleek mahogany wet bar, tucked into the far corner of the room. My hand was perfectly steady as I
Reset
lifted a
inbox.
heavy crystal decanter, the dark, rich Cabernet splashing smoothly against the sides of a delicate wine glass. The chaotic, frantic energy of the hospital felt like a distant memory. Here in my domain, I was in absolute control. The soft chime of
Not
my
even
private
finished.
intercom broke the silence.
Yeah, because it's like
Boss
7
Elena's voice
minutes
floated
and
through the speaker.
I'm just like in such a bad
"Dr.
spot
Andre is
there.
stepping off the private elevator
I had
now."
like 11 pearls.
"Send him in," I replied, taking a slow sip of the
and 3
wine.
rods.
The vintage was bold and unapologetically
So I,
sharp,
like, can't
much like the
zero.
mood I was currently in. The heavy oak doors parted and Dr. Andre walked in. Andre
Back at
was not
zero,
just a
keep going.
brilliant cardiologist, he was the chief medical officer of Aura Health and my oldest friend. We had survived the grueling trenches of medical school together. He was the only person who knew the genuine reason I had dropped out
Oh
8
my god,
years ago,
32.
and he was the one who had quietly facilitated my discreet exit from the hospital earlier that afternoon. Andre dropped
Okay.
a thick, pristine white medical file directly onto my desk. His handsome face was set in a grim, serious line, but a dangerous spark of amusement danced in his eyes. "You are officially a free woman, Zuri," he said, taking a seat in the leather chair opposite
I
my
need
desk.
these.
I pulled every string I had with the hospital
Crafting
administration
tables.
board. I had 3 independent top-tier psychiatrists conduct a full review of your medical charts from the past 48 hours. This file contains a bulletproof certified evaluation proving that you are of completely sound mind. You have 0 signs of psychosis, paranoia, or mental instability. You are simply recovering from a physical cardiac event. I smiled, tracing the rim of my wineglass. I assumed Jamal did not use a legitimate doctor to secure his emergency conservatorship order. Andre scoffed, crossing his legs. Not even close.
Uh,
He bribed a disgraced on-call physician to rubber stamp a preliminary psychiatric hold
what?
using your
How did it
8-year-old
even place
medical
there?
records regarding academic anxiety. It was sloppy, desperate work. But Zuri, that is not even the most
I
interesting
didn't
thing I
realize it was
found out
1 minute
today.
50
I raised
seconds.
an eyebrow, setting my glass down
The
on the
slowest
desk.
thing ever.
Go on. Andre leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. I have been suspicious of your brother for a long time. You know my wife sits on the charity board with Chloe and your mother Beatrice. They parade around Atlanta acting like American royalty, but the math never added up for me. So while Elena was digging into his corporate shell companies, I reached out to a few old money contacts from Chloe's hometown. He paused, letting the suspense hang in the air for a fraction of a second. Chloe's aristocratic family is entirely fake, Zuri. I frowned. What do you mean, fake? They own estates in Newport. They trace their lineage back to the Mayflower. They trace their debt back to the Mayflower, Andre corrected with a sharp laugh. Her family went completely bankrupt over a decade ago. They lost the estates, the trust funds, everything. They kept the
Wait,
last name and
what's
absolutely nothing else. Chloe married Jamal because she was flat broke and desperate to maintain her upper crust socialite facade. And your brother, whose entire ego is built on impressing your mother with his proximity to whiteness and wealth, took the bait hook, line, and sinker. The pieces of the puzzle began snapping into place with terrifying speed. Jamal's high-interest shadow loan. The sudden aggressive move to steal my $2 million apartment. The panicked, frantic energy beneath his custom suits. To keep Chloe dripping in Hermes Birkins and driving European supercars, Jamal has been living light years beyond his actual means. Andre continued, his voice dropping lower. And when his own exorbitant salary wasn't enough to fund Chloe's fake aristocratic lifestyle and keep your mother Beatrice bragging at the country club, he started cutting corners. Jamal has been actively embezzling money from his own clients' trust funds. The room went dead silent. The sheer magnitude of Jamal's reckless stupidity washed over me. He was not just a greedy brother. He was a cornered, desperate criminal. He took the $15 million loan from my shell company to secretly repay his clients before the federal auditors catch the missing funds. I murmured, the realization hitting me like a bolt of lightning. The real estate bets Elena mentioned earlier were just a smokescreen. He is stealing from Peter to pay
Yeah, I need a
Paul.
VC.
And my apartment, my $2
But
million
like,
asset,
they're all
was just
playing
meant to be a quick, easy cash
Subnautica
grab to
2.
buy him a few more months of breathing room.
Which, like, I don't
Exactly.
know.
Andre nodded. He saw you collapse on your parents' floor, and he did not see a sister dying. He saw a $2 million life raft. He thought he could have you declared legally insane, lock you in a facility, and liquidate your condo before you even woke up. I looked down at the white medical file sitting on my desk. The
Yeah,
sheer,
true.
profound level of betrayal should have broken my heart. For 8 years, they had treated me like a repulsive stain on the family name. My mother had wept fake tears to the neighbors, playing the tragic victim, while her golden child son was actively committing federal fraud to buy his fake rich wife more designer handbags. They thought I was weak. They thought my silence was submission. Thank you, Andre. I said, my voice deadly calm. You have no idea what you have just given me. Andre smiled, standing up and buttoning his suit jacket. Oh, I think I have a pretty good idea. Just promise me I get a front row seat to the fireworks. As Andre left the office, Elena slipped back in holding her tablet. Her eyes were bright with anticipation. She had clearly been listening through the encrypted internal feed. The emergency conservatorship hearing is officially on the court docket for tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, Elena reported swiftly. Jamal has filed the paperwork to make his financial control over you permanent. Your parents and Chloe are listed as his primary character witnesses to testify to your severe mental instability. I picked up the psychiatric evaluation file, feeling the solid, heavy weight of it in my hands. Jamal was walking into that courtroom tomorrow morning believing he had orchestrated the perfect, flawless crime. He thought he was going to walk out with the legal right to sell my home and strip me of my human rights. Elena, I said, turning my chair to face the massive windows once more, watching the city lights begin to flicker on across the darkening Atlanta skyline. Alert our corporate legal team. I want 3 of our most aggressive litigators waiting for me at the courthouse tomorrow morning. Bring the original $15 million loan default documents from Apex Capital Holdings. And print out the entire digital footprint of Jamal's embezzlement trail. Yes, boss, Elena said, her fingers flying rapidly across her tablet screen. Anything else? I picked up my wine glass, taking one final, deeply satisfying sip. Call the judge's clerk. Let them know the defendant Zuri Marcus will be arriving in person to contest the conservatorship. Let my brother think he has won the war tonight, because tomorrow morning I am going to burn his entire fake aristocratic world straight to the ground. The heavy oak doors of courtroom 4B swung inward with a solid thud.
Is that a room
I
for
walked
them?
down the
Wait,
center
did.
aisle wearing a razor-sharp charcoal
I don't
suit
know if it's
flanked by 3 of the
completable.
most feared corporate litigators on the eastern seaboard. Jamal was already seated at the petitioner's table. When he saw me, he
Not
actually
that.
leaned back in his chair and let out a soft, arrogant chuckle. He looked at my legal team with complete dismissal, assuming I had simply hired a few desperate public defenders with the last pennies to my name. Behind him in the gallery sat my parents and Chloe. Beatrice had dressed for the occasion, wearing a modest black dress
Okay,
and
there's no
clutching a
way.
lace handkerchief, looking the part of the grieving, terrified mother. Marcus
I
sat
can
rigidly
mine
beside
you
her, projecting
crying.
solemn authority. Chloe was busy checking her reflection in her phone
Wait, this is gonna
screen,
take so
her
long.
fake designer handbag resting
I need
prominently on her lap.
3
The judge, a
obby.
no-nonsense woman named Honorable Sterling, took the bench and immediately
There's
called the
1
emergency
lava.
conservatorship hearing to
Have to mine
order.
2 more obby
Jamal's
after
lawyer,
this.
a sweaty
Maybe like
man in a cheap
140.
suit, who looked like he was being paid in empty promises, stood up to address the court. Your Honor, we are here to finalize the permanent conservatorship of Zuri Marcus. As the documents state, my client's sister has suffered a severe psychotic break. She has a documented history of academic failure and mental instability. Following a major cardiac event 2 days ago, she began exhibiting extreme delusions of grandeur, claiming to be a billionaire, and brandishing
Great,
fraudulent black cards. She is a profound danger to herself and her finances. Her brother Jamal Marcus, a highly respected wealth management executive, is stepping in solely to save her life. Judge Sterling peers over her reading glasses, scanning the fabricated medical documents Jamal had submitted. It is a tragic situation, the judge murmured. Miss Marcus, do you have legal representation present? My lead counsel Harrison stood up. He was a towering, silver-haired man whose hourly billing rate could have bankrupted Jamal's entire firm. Yes, Your Honor, he said, his voice echoing with absolute quiet authority. We are here to motion for the immediate dismissal of this conservatorship on the grounds of perjury, evidence tampering, and gross financial fraud committed by the petitioner Jamal Marcus. Jamal shot to his feet, his face flushing dark red. Objection. Your Honor, this woman is completely unhinged, and her lawyers are clearly enabling her delusions. Sit down, Mr. Marcus, Judge Sterling snapped, bringing her gavel down sharply. I will hear the defense. Harrison calmly unbuttoned his suit jacket and approached the bench, sliding a thick stack of certified documents across the polished
I never
wood.
actually mined that block.
First, Your Honor, regarding my client's alleged delusions of grandeur. I present certified federal bank affidavits and corporate trust filings. Zuri Marcus is not hallucinating wealth. She is the sole beneficiary of a blind trust with a net worth exceeding 9 figures. The black card she presented at the hospital was entirely legitimate and issued directly to her by the bank's ultra-high net worth division. A collective gasp swept through the gallery. Jamal's jaw dropped open. He grabbed the documents from his lawyer's hands, his eyes darting frantically across the certified federal seals and the astronomical account balances. The color completely drained from his face, leaving him looking physically ill. Furthermore, Harrison continued smoothly. My client's medical competency is absolute. The preliminary psychiatric hold Mr. Marcus submitted was signed by a disgraced physician who has not held hospital privileges in 3 years. We have submitted a comprehensive evaluation conducted yesterday by 3 independent board-certified psychiatrists led by the Chief Medical Officer of Atlanta General. Miss Marcus is in perfect mental health. She is merely recovering from a physical cardiac incident. The courtroom went dead silent. The carefully constructed lie my family had built over the last 8 years was disintegrating under the blinding light of federal proof. Beatrice, realizing the legal trap was snapping shut, immediately sprang into action. She stood up from the gallery, bursting into loud theatrical tears. "Your Honor, please, you have to understand," Beatrice sobbed, clutching the wooden railing. "She was dying on my floor." Her heart stopped. I was terrified. We were just trying to protect her. A mother knows when her child is in danger. We only wanted to get her the medical help she was too sick to accept. Judge Sterling looked momentarily sympathetic, her expression softening toward the weeping mother. "It is understandable that a medical emergency could cause family panic," the judge began. Harrison did not miss a beat. He raised his hand, stopping the judge mid-sentence. "Your Honor, we anticipated this defense of maternal panic, which is why we would like to submit Exhibit C into the public record." Harrison tapped a button on his laptop and the large digital monitors mounted on the courtroom walls flickered to life. An audio file appeared on the screen. "This is an encrypted audio recording recovered from the vehicle dash cam of Dr. Andre Vance," Harrison explained. Dr. Andre arrived at the Marcus family residence at the exact same moment the paramedics pulled into the driveway. His vehicle was parked directly behind the ambulance, capturing the raw audio of Beatrice and Marcus, intercepting the emergency medical technicians outside their home. Harrison pressed play. The sound of blaring ambulance sirens filled the courtroom, followed by the screech of tires, then the heavy thud of ambulance doors opening. But before the paramedics could speak, Beatrice's voice cut through the audio, sharp, cold, and entirely devoid of panic. "Turn those sirens off immediately." Beatrice's recorded voice snapped, echoing off the courtroom walls. "You are embarrassing us in front of the entire neighborhood. Do you know who we are?" A paramedic's voice sounded breathless and urgent. "Ma'am, we received a call for a full cardiac arrest. We need to get inside right now." "She is fine," Beatrice scoffed on the recording, her tone dripping with absolute disgust. "She is just having a panic attack because she's a massive failure.
Thanks,
She
doctor.
does this for attention. Do not rush in there and make a scene. Let her pass out. It will actually make it much easier for my son to get her signature on a power of attorney document before you take her away." The audio clicked off. The silence that followed was suffocating. It was a heavy, toxic quiet that settled over the room like ash. Beatrice was frozen, standing in the gallery with her lace handkerchief pressed against her mouth, her eyes wide with sheer, unadulterated terror. The mask had been ripped off. The entire courtroom had just heard a mother casually delay life-saving medical treatment for her dying daughter, simply to protect her social standing and facilitate a financial theft. Judge Sterling looked visibly disgusted. Her face hardened into a mask of pure judicial fury. She slammed her gavel down so hard the sharp crack made Jamal physically jump. "This court finds the petitioner's claims to be entirely fabricated, fraudulent, and deeply malicious." Judge Sterling announced, her voice ringing with anger. "The emergency conservatorship is revoked immediately. All freezes on Miss Marcus's assets are lifted. Mr. Marcus, I am forwarding this entire transcript, the fabricated medical documents, and this audio recording directly to the State Bar Association and the District Attorney's Office. You will be investigated for perjury, filing false court documents, and attempted grand larceny. Jamal collapsed into his chair, holding his head in his hands, as his lawyer quietly packed his briefcase and backed away from the table.
Boy,
Marcus grabbed Beatrice by the
I'm
arm,
sorry.
roughly dragging her out of the gallery as she stared blankly ahead, entirely destroyed by her own words. Chloe scrambled after them, her face pale, realizing that her fake aristocratic lifestyle was about to be funded by a man facing federal prison. I buttoned my suit jacket, thanked Harrison, and walked out of the courtroom. The air in the marble hallway felt clean and incredibly light. I had won. I had taken my life back, and I had done it without raising my voice once. But as I reached the elevator banks, heavy, frantic footsteps echoed behind me. Jamal cut in front of the elevator doors, blocking my path. His tie was crooked, his chest was heaving, and he looked like a wild, cornered animal. "You think you are so smart, Zuri?" Jamal spat, his voice shaking with volatile rage. "You think because you hid some money and played a recording that you have ruined me? You just got lucky today." I crossed my arms, staring at him with calm amusement. "You committed perjury, Jamal. You are going to lose your law license." "I am not losing anything," he snarled, stepping closer, jabbing a finger toward my face. "I am untouchable. You hear me. I am about to sign the biggest corporate acquisition deal of my entire life. My firm is closing a massive contract with Aura Health by the end of the week. They are injecting $15 million into my portfolio. I am going to be richer than you could ever dream of. And when that check clears, I am going to hire a real legal team, and I am going to use that money to crush you into the pavement." I looked at my brother, a man so consumed by his own arrogance that he could not see the guillotine blade hanging directly above his neck. He was banking his entire survival on a shadow loan from my own company. He was threatening to destroy me using my own money. I did not argue with him. I did not correct him. I simply looked at him with a slow, bright smile.
Well,
"I am sure the
do I
CEO
collect
of Aura Health
dandelions?
is
No,
eagerly looking
just
forward to reviewing
15
your final
food.
contract, Jamal," I said, my voice soft and deadly. "Good luck with the acquisition." I stepped around him, walking into the elevator and letting the doors slide shut, leaving him standing in the hallway, entirely oblivious to the fact that his execution was already scheduled for Friday. 48 hours later, the soft melodic clinking of sterling silver spoons against fine bone china echoed across the sunlit dining room of the Piedmont Heritage Club. Founded nearly a century ago, the club was the absolute pinnacle of Atlanta's historic African-American elite. Membership was not something you could simply buy. It required a
Hello,
pristine lineage,
Vinlux.
impeccable social standing, and a rigorous approval process by the board of directors. For my mother, Beatrice, this club was her entire universe. It was the stage where she performed her grandest illusions of wealth and superiority. I stood in the shadows of the grand foyer, watching through the open mahogany doors as Beatrice held court at a prime table near the floor-to-ceiling windows. She was surrounded by the wives of prominent judges, neurosurgeons, and politicians. Chloe sat dutifully by her side, wearing a stiff Chanel suit that I knew for a fact Jamal had purchased using embezzled client funds. Beatrice was pouring Earl Grey tea from a silver pot, leaning in closely to her captivated audience as she engaged in her favorite blood sport, damage control. Rumors of the disastrous courthouse hearing had clearly begun to circulate through their social circles, and Beatrice was aggressively spinning the narrative to protect her fragile ego. "It has been a living nightmare for our family," Beatrice sighed, pressing a manicured hand to her chest. "Zuri has completely lost her grip on reality. We tried to get her psychiatric help, but she hired some slick predatory lawyers to manipulate the judge. She actually stood in open court and claimed she was a billionaire. Can you imagine the sheer delusion? It breaks my heart to see my own daughter spiral into such severe mental illness. We simply had to distance ourselves for our own safety." A collective murmur of sympathetic gasps rippled around the table. Mrs. Sterling, a federal judge's wife, patted Beatrice's hand consolingly. "You are so strong, Beatrice. It must be devastating. But at least you have Jamal to carry the family name." At the mention of her golden child, Beatrice's posture instantly straightened, and a triumphant gleam returned to her eyes. "Oh, my Jamal is doing brilliantly," she boasted, her voice carrying across the quiet room. "He is about to sign the most lucrative contract of his career. His firm is taking over the entire asset portfolio for Aura Health, You know, the medical tech unicorn. They're paying him a $15 million retainer just to start. Chloe practically vibrated in her seat, eager to join the bragging. Jamal has a private meeting with the Aura Health CEO this Friday, she chimed in, taking a delicate sip of her tea. We are already in escrow on a 6-bedroom estate in Buckhead to celebrate. The CEO specifically requested Jamal's expertise. I listened to them weaving their pathetic web of lies and felt absolutely nothing but a cold surgical precision. I smoothed the lapels of my tailored emerald green power suit, adjusted the cuffs of my silk blouse, and gave a subtle nod to the 3 people standing beside me. Arthur Pendleton, the president of the Piedmont Heritage Club, cleared his throat nervously. Beside him stood the club's chief financial officer and the head of the membership board. They were 3 of the most powerful men in Atlanta high society, and currently they were looking at me with an expression that bordered on absolute reverence. "Are you ready, Miss Marcus?" Arthur asked, his voice hushed and deeply respectful. "I am ready, Arthur," I replied. "Lead the way." The heavy double doors swung open fully, and our procession entered the main dining room. The shift in the room's atmosphere was instantaneous. Conversations abruptly halted mid-sentence. Heads turned. The soft classical piano music playing in the corner suddenly seemed deafening in the heavy silence. I walked with my spine perfectly straight, my heels clicking rhythmically against the imported marble floors, flanked by the highest authorities the club possessed. Beatrice was
I
in the
hate
middle of taking a
pirates.
sip of
Piece
her
of
tea
shit.
when she looked up and saw me. The fine porcelain cup froze halfway to her mouth. Her eyes widened in sheer, unfiltered shock, her perfectly powdered face draining of all color. Chloe dropped her silver spoon onto her saucer with a loud, clattering crash. As we approached their table, Beatrice abruptly shoved her chair back and stood up, her face contorting with arrogant fury. She desperately tried to reclaim her power in front of her wealthy friends. "What is the meaning of this?" Beatrice demanded, her voice sharp and shrill, cutting through the quiet dining room. "Zuri, you have no business being here. This is a private members-only establishment. You cannot just walk in off the street in your cheap clothes and harass us." She turned immediately to the club president, expecting him to blindly follow her orders. "Arthur, have security remove this woman at once.
Where's my...
She is unstable
Oh,
and she is trespassing."
okay.
Arthur Pendleton did not move to call security.
Okay.
Instead, he looked at Beatrice with an expression of profound pity, mingled with deep embarrassment.
Okay.
He clasped his hands in front of him and let out a heavy sigh. "Beatrice, I suggest you lower your voice,"
What?
Arthur said, his tone strictly professional but carrying a warning edge. "Miss Marcus is not trespassing. She is here today as the most honored and vital guest this institution has ever received." Beatrice blinked, her mind completely unable to process the words. "Honored guest," she scoffed, letting out a harsh, disbelieving laugh. "Arthur, she is a medical school dropout who lives in a dingy apartment. She is experiencing a psychotic break. She has absolutely no standing in a place like this." I stepped forward smoothly, bypassing Arthur and locking eyes with my mother. I rested my hands casually on the back of an empty leather dining chair. "Actually, Beatrice, I have every standing in a place like this," I said, my voice projecting clearly across the silent room, ensuring every socialite hanging on our every word heard me perfectly. As I am sure Arthur can explain, the Piedmont Heritage Club has been struggling with a massive, quiet
okay,
liquidity
what? Like, I don't
crisis
know what's
for
wrong
the
with that
past
too,
3
like-
years. The historic property taxes, the extensive renovations, and the declining membership dues pushed this prestigious institution to the absolute brink of foreclosure. The women at Beatrice's table exchanged panicked, horrified glances. This was a fiercely guarded secret among the board of directors. Last month, the bank was preparing to seize the property. I continued keeping my eyes pinned to my mother's crumbling facade. But a private equity firm stepped in at the final hour. They bought the club's entire debt portfolio, absorbing the mortgage and injecting $10 million of operational capital to save this historic landmark from being sold to commercial developers. Beatrice swallowed hard, her throat visibly clicking. "I do not care about the club's finances," she snapped, though her voice lacked its usual venom. "What does any of that have to do with you being here?" I smiled, a slow, devastating curve of my lips. "Because the private equity firm that bought the debt is Apex Capital Holdings," I stated smoothly, and I am the sole owner and CEO of Apex Capital." The entire dining room drew a collective, breathless gasp. Chloe let out a tiny strangled squeak, covering her mouth with her hand. Beatrice stumbled backwards slightly, her legs hitting the edge of her chair. "That is a lie," Beatrice whispered, her eyes darting frantically toward Arthur for confirmation. "Tell her she is lying, Arthur. It is the absolute truth." Beatrice, the chief financial officer, stepped forward, holding a leather-bound ledger. "Miss Marcus is our primary financial benefactor. She essentially owns the ground we are standing on. She requested a tour of the facility today to review our operational protocols and to audit the membership accounts to ensure the club returns to profitability." "Which brings me to why I stopped by your table, Beatrice," I said, my tone shifting from conversational to ruthlessly clinical. "While reviewing the club's ledgers this morning, I noticed a rather glaring irregularity in the accounts receivable. It appears that while you have been sitting here drinking imported tea and bragging about your immense wealth, you have failed to pay your platinum tier membership dues for the last 6 consecutive months." Beatrice flinched as if I had physically struck her. The women at her table visibly recoiled, pulling away from her. In their world, financial insolvency was a contagious disease, and public exposure was a death sentence. "You currently owe the Piedmont Heritage Club $42,000 in arrears," I announced, ensuring the exact number rang out clearly. "I find it deeply hypocritical that you would attempt to declare me financially incompetent in a court of law, while you are secretly defaulting on your country club bills to maintain a fake illusion of grandeur." "This is an outrage," Chloe suddenly shouted, jumping up from her seat, her face red with indignant fury. "You cannot speak to us like this. Jamal is going to crush you. When he closes the Aura Health deal tomorrow, he will buy this entire club and have you thrown out on the street." I turned my gaze to Chloe, looking at her with nothing but cold, calculating pity. "Chloe, your husband is not closing a deal with Aura Health," I said softly, the truth cutting through the air like a scalpel. "He is defaulting on a $15 million shadow loan that he illegally secured using embezzled client funds. He took that loan from Apex Capital to hide the fact that your fake old money family is entirely bankrupt, and to pay for the designer clothes you are currently wearing." Chloe's mouth fell open. Her fake aristocratic confidence shattered into a million irreparable pieces. And as for Aura Health, I continued, leaning in slightly. "Jamal will not be having a meeting with the CEO on Friday, because the CEO of Aura Health is currently standing right in front of you." The total, absolute destruction of their reality finally set in. Beatrice looked at me, her eyes wide and glassy, her chest heaving as she struggled to pull air into her lungs. The daughter she had mocked, belittled, and attempted to destroy was the invisible titan holding the strings to their entire existence. I was the billionaire tech CEO. I was the private equity ghost. I was the executioner. Arthur Pendleton cleared his throat, stepping forward and gesturing politely toward the exit. "Beatrice," he said, his voice devoid of any former warmth, "given the substantial delinquency on your account and the disruptive nature of this incident, the board has unanimously voted to revoke your membership effective immediately. I must ask you and your daughter-in-law to vacate the premises." Beatrice opened her mouth to argue, to scream, to demand respect, but no words came out. She looked at the faces of her wealthy friends, the women she had spent decades trying to impress. They were looking at her with utter, undisguised revulsion. The club's general manager stepped up to the table, extending his arm toward the grand double doors. "Right this way, ladies," he instructed, his tone brooking no argument. My mother, Beatrice, a woman who had spent her entire life stepping on the throats of others to maintain her precious social standing, was forced to pick up her purse in absolute agonizing silence. She walked across the dining room, the sound of her heels echoing in the quiet space, stripped of her dignity, her fake wealth, and her golden child's future. Chloe followed closely behind her head, bowed in profound humiliation. I watched them take the longest walk of their lives, escorted out the front doors like common trespassers. I did not gloat, and I did not celebrate. I simply turned to the board of directors, offering a polite smile. "Now, gentlemen," I said smoothly, gesturing toward the private executive suites, "let us review those financial restructuring plans. We have a lot of work to do." Friday evening arrived with the stifling humidity typical of an Atlanta summer. But inside the grand ballroom of the St. Regis Hotel, the air was crisp and thick with the scent of expensive orchids and desperation. Jamal had spared absolutely no expense for his victory lap. He had rented the most exclusive venue in the city to celebrate Marcus Wealth Management, securing a highly publicized $15 million partnership with Aura Health. The sheer audacity of the event was a testament to my brother's monumental ego and his fragile grasp on reality. After the humiliating spectacle at the Piedmont Heritage Club, a rational person would have fled the city. But Jamal was not rational. He was a cornered animal playing the highest stakes game of bluff in corporate history. He had spent the last 48 hours doing aggressive damage control, convincing my parents and his wife that my performance at the club was the ultimate manifestation of my psychotic breakdown. He told them I had hired actors, hacked a few public databases, and staged a complex prank to embarrass them. He promised them that the real CEO of Aura Health, an elusive billionaire he claimed to have been corresponding with for months via heavily encrypted emails, was sending a proxy tonight to finalize the deal and transfer the funds. He was funding this entire lavish gala with the last remaining scraps of his embezzled client accounts, desperately projecting an image of supreme liquidity to hold off the federal auditors for just one more week. I stood in the shadowed alcove just outside the ballroom doors, watching the grotesque display of my family's vanity through the beveled glass. Beatrice was holding court near a towering 5-tier champagne fountain. She had recovered flawlessly from her unceremonious ejection from the country club. She was wearing a silver sequined gown and telling a captive audience of local politicians and socialites that she had voluntarily withdrawn her membership because the club's facilities had simply become too outdated and pedestrian for their family's elevating status. Marcus stood beside her, swirling a glass of rare scotch, nodding approvingly at his own fabricated legacy. And then there was Chloe. She was practically vibrating with toxic arrogance. She wore a strapless designer dress and a diamond collar necklace that caught the light of the crystal chandeliers with blinding intensity. I knew exactly where those diamonds came from. They were bought with the stolen retirement funds of a retired school teacher who had trusted Jamal with her life savings. Chloe flaunted the stolen jewels with absolute pride, looking down her nose at the waitstaff and laughing loudly at jokes that were not funny. Jamal was the center of it all. He was working the room with a glass of champagne in one hand and a cigar in the other, accepting premature congratulations from his investors. He looked incredibly smug, practically glowing with the false certainty that he had finally won. He firmly believed the $15 million wire transfer from Aura Health would hit his accounts by midnight, wiping away his shadow loans, his crimes, and his failures. It was time to wake him up. I gave a brief, sharp nod to Elena, who stood quietly at my right side.
It's like, I'm just getting
She relayed the signal through her
444s
earpiece.
with Tanabe. Like, I need
The
some better
massive
pace.
gilded double doors of the ballroom were suddenly pulled open by two towering hotel staff
These scenes are all
members.
like so mid.
The sweeping orchestral music flowing from the string quartet in the corner seemed to falter for a fraction of a second as the heavy doors swung wide. I stepped over the threshold into the brilliant light of the ballroom. I was wearing a floor-length custom crimson silk gown that moved like liquid fire against the polished marble floor. My hair was styled in a flawless, sleek crown, and the only jewelry I wore was a simple, devastatingly sharp diamond drop necklace. I did not come alone. Flanking me, forming an impenetrable human shield, were 4 elite private security contractors in immaculate dark suits. Their presence commanded absolute immediate silence. As I stood at the top of the grand staircase descending into the ballroom, it felt as though the entire room was revolving around me in a slow, deliberate waltz. The glittering chandeliers, the sea of shocked faces, the frozen expressions of the elite guests, they all blurred into a continuous tracking shot that circled my arrival. The low hum of conversation evaporated instantly, replaced by a stunned, heavy silence. Every single eye in the room was locked onto me. Beatrice froze her champagne flute, pausing halfway to her lips. The color drained from her face, leaving her looking sickly and gray under the bright lights. Marcus dropped his cigar into his glass of scotch, a loud hiss echoing in the quiet space. Chloe's hand flew to her stolen diamond necklace, her eyes widening in pure, unfiltered panic as she remembered the cold truth I had delivered at the country club. But Jamal did not freeze. When his eyes landed on me, his face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. The smug veneer vanished, replaced by the vicious desperation of a man who sees his carefully constructed house of cards beginning to sway in the wind. He shoved his half-empty champagne glass into the chest of a passing waiter and marched across the ballroom floor, his expensive dress shoes striking the marble with aggressive, violent thuds. He stopped at the bottom of the staircase, looking up at me with toxic hatred burning in his dark eyes. His chest heaved as he pointed a trembling finger directly at my face. "What the hell are you doing here?" Zuri Jamal demanded, his voice a harsh, venomous hiss that carried clearly through the silent room. "You are completely insane. You actually followed us here to ruin the biggest night of my life." I looked down at him, my expression perfectly serene. I walked slowly down the final few steps, my security detail moving seamlessly with me, forming a protective half-circle. "I am not here to ruin your night, Jamal," I said, my voice smooth and carrying effortlessly across the tense silence of the ballroom. "I am simply attending a corporate event." Jamal let out a loud, barking laugh of disbelief, shaking his head and looking back at the crowd of investors, as if appealing to their common sense. "You do not belong here," he sneered, stepping
Oh, hi,
closer,
GT4J.
attempting to use his
What's up?
physical size to intimidate me. The security contractor to my left immediately shifted forward, blocking Jamal's path with a solid wall of muscle. Jamal flinched, stepping back but keeping his furious gaze locked on me. "You are a sick, pathetic girl," Jamal spat, lowering his voice, so only I and my guards could hear. "You got lucky at the courthouse because your slick lawyers found a loophole. But your little games end tonight. I am about to sign the most massive acquisition deal in the history of this city with Aura Health. When that $15 million clears my account, I am going to buy you and your entire miserable life. I am going to use that money to crush you into the dirt." I looked at my brother, taking in his desperate, sweating face, his aggressive posturing, and his monumental, blinding ignorance. He was standing in a ballroom paid for with stolen money,
The next
wearing a
chunk,
suit
like,
bought
I
with fraud, screaming at the
this
one
girl.
person who held the absolute power to destroy him. I tilted my head slightly, a cool, genuine smile touching the corners of my mouth. "Is that right, Jamal?" I murmured softly, ensuring my voice was calm and steady against his rising panic. "You are going to use Aura Health's money to crush me." "That is exactly right," he snarled, his face turning red. "So you can take your rented security guards and your fake confidence and get the hell out of my party before I have you thrown out." I did not break eye contact. I reached a hand out to the side. Elena stepped forward smoothly, placing a sleek black leather portfolio directly into my outstretched palm. "That is an incredibly fascinating strategy, Jamal," I replied, my smile widening into something sharp and lethal. "But there is a minor logistical flaw in your brilliant plan." I held the black portfolio up, tapping the polished leather cover with one manicured nail. The embossed silver logo of Aura Health gleamed under the ballroom lights. "You cannot use my own money to destroy me." The words hung in the air, suspended in the sudden suffocating quiet of the ballroom. Jamal stared at me, his brow furrowed in genuine confusion. His brain was misfiring, unable to reconcile the sister he had deemed a worthless dropout with the corporate titan standing before him.
Oh,
Before he could formulate a
no.
coherent response, Chloe pushed her way past him. She marched up to me, her heels clicking sharply against the marble, her eyes blazing with that familiar toxic entitlement. She positioned herself right in my face, radiating cheap perfume and unearned arrogance. "Are you out of your mind, Zuri?"
Are you talking to me, bitch?
Chloe sneered, her voice loud enough to echo across the front rows of the gathered crowd. "Look at you. You barge in here wearing a
Bro,
flashy dress,
I
thinking you
don't
can
listen to
play
music.
pretend with actual important people. You are nothing but a pathetic sick woman who needs to be locked in a ward. You will never belong in this world. This is old money. This is a legacy of wealth and breeding that you could not buy even in your wildest psychotic fantasies. So take your little rent-a-cops and leave before we have you arrested for trespassing." I did not flinch. I did not yell back. I simply looked at her, observing the frantic pulse jumping in her neck and the slight tremor in her hands. She was terrified, but she was too committed to her performance to stop now. I looked over Chloe's shoulder, catching the eyes of her wealthy socialite friends, who were watching the exchange with rapt attention like sharks circling a bleeding fish. Old money? I repeated softly, testing the words on my tongue. A legacy of wealth. That is a beautiful fairy tale, Chloe. It truly is. Without taking my eyes off her pale face, I raised my right hand and snapped my fingers once. Elena, who had already integrated her tablet into the hotel's state-of-the-art audiovisual system, tapped a single button. The soft string quartet music was instantly cut off. The massive presentation screens flanking the ballroom stage, the very screens Jamal had intended to use to showcase his glorious Aura Health acquisition, flared to life with blinding white light. The guests gasped, turning their attention to the massive digital displays. I think it is time we talk about your legacy, Chloe, I said, my voice carrying a lethal calm. On the screens, massive, high-definition images of federal court documents appeared. The text was highlighted in bright yellow, making it impossible to misinterpret. It was a Chapter 7 bankruptcy filing from 5 years ago. Let us look at the reality of your old money, I announced, projecting my voice, so every single investor and socialite in the room could hear. 5 years ago, your parents completely liquidated their estate. They lost the Newport properties, the trusts, the yachts, and every single liquid asset to their name, to avoid federal prosecution for tax evasion. You came to Atlanta flat broke, hunting for a desperate, insecure man who was foolish enough to buy into your fabricated aristocratic last name. You found Jamal, and he has been bankrupting himself ever since to keep up your humiliating charade. Chloe's jaw dropped. The color rushed out of her face, leaving her looking like a wax mannequin. That is a lie, she shrieked, turning toward the screens. Shut that off. Jamal, do something. But Elena was already moving to the next slide. The screen shifted from the bankruptcy documents to a digital receipt from a highly exclusive luxury rental boutique in Beverly Hills. Next to the receipt was a crystal-clear catalog photo of the exact diamond collar necklace currently resting against Chloe's collarbone. I stepped closer to Chloe, who was now instinctively clutching the diamonds at her throat. You talk about wealth and breeding, I continued ruthlessly while wearing rented jewelry on a Tuesday night. But the most pathetic part is not that you rented the diamonds, Chloe. The pathetic part is how you tried to pay for them. Elena highlighted the bottom of the receipt. It showed the payment method, an American Express card registered to Jamal Marcus. Below the card number, a bright red digital stamp flashed across the screen in bold letters. Declined account overdrawn. Jamal's credit cards are entirely maxed out, I said, the absolute silence of the ballroom amplifying every word. He could not even afford the security deposit for your rented diamonds. He had to wire the funds from a stolen client escrow account just to let you play dress-up tonight. The reaction from the crowd was instantaneous and devastating. The wealthy elite of Atlanta did not tolerate fraud, and they certainly did not tolerate the stench of poverty masquerading as superiority. A vicious wave of whispers swept through the ballroom. Chloe's friends, the women she had spent years desperately trying to impress, were pointing at her and covering their mouths in shock. I saw one woman pull out her phone recording the screens and then zooming in on Chloe's horrified face. Chloe staggered backward, her hands shaking violently. She looked at Jamal, her eyes wide and pleading for him to fix it to make the nightmare stop. But Jamal was paralyzed, staring at the screens with a look of absolute gutted horror. His investors, the men he had courted for months, were watching him with expressions of profound disgust. The facade was completely obliterated. You ruined everything, Jamal whispered, his voice cracking. He looked at me, his eyes bloodshot and wide with a sudden violent madness. You ruined my life. I just showed them the truth, Jamal, I replied coldly. You ruined yourself. Something inside him snapped. The final thread holding back his explosive rage severed completely. A guttural, animalistic scream ripped from his throat. He lunged forward, bypassing my security detail with a sudden burst of adrenaline-fueled speed. His fist was raised, aimed directly at my face, his intention clear to beat me into submission right there in front of the entire
Bro, let me
ballroom.
out.
I did not even have time to blink. Before Jamal could close
Am I
the
like
distance, a
entering the
tall,
bash?
broad-shouldered
Or
figure
not?
stepped out from the front row of the crowd, moving with terrifying
Where is
speed.
the bash?
Dr. Andre, the chief medical officer of Aura Health, and my oldest friend intercepted Jamal mid-lunge. Andre grabbed Jamal by the lapels of his custom suit, twisting his body, and slamming him
Yo,
forcefully
GP
backward
portrait,
against
thank
a
you so
marble
much.
pillar. The
The
impact
500
echoed with a
bits.
loud, sickening thud. Andre pinned Jamal against the stone,
Oh wow.
his forearm pressed firmly against Jamal's chest, trapping him completely. Andre's handsome face was set in a mask of cold, lethal authority. "Do not even think about touching her," Andre said, his voice a low, dangerous growl that carried over the shocked gasps of the crowd. Jamal struggled against the grip, his eyes wide and wild, but Andre did not budge an inch. The room watched in stunned silence as the brilliant cardiologist effortlessly subdued the supposedly triumphant executive. The shift in power was absolute and irrevocable. "Let him go, Andre," I said, my voice slicing through the thick, paralyzed silence of the ballroom. Andre held his piercing glare on Jamal for one heartbeat longer before smoothly stepping back and returning to his position at my side. Jamal slumped against the cold marble pillar, gasping for air as if he had been drowning. His custom-tailored suit jacket was severely crumpled, his silk tie knocked askew, and his entire aura of untouchable corporate dominance had evaporated, leaving behind nothing but a terrified, sweating man. The guests in the room were completely motionless. The elite of Atlanta stood frozen with their champagne flutes halfway to their mouths, entirely captivated by the violent dismantling of the Marcus family empire. Then the spell broke. Beatrice shoved her way through the front row of onlookers. She marched toward the center of the floor, her silver sequined gown catching the light, and her face contorted into a mask of pure, unhinged malice. The country club humiliation had wounded her pride, but this public execution of her golden child pushed her entirely over the edge. She abandoned every ounce of her carefully cultivated southern refinement. "You ungrateful
Okay.
demon!" Beatrice screamed, pointing a trembling manicured finger directly at my face.
Bro.
"How dare you? How dare you walk into this room and try to destroy
I'm
your
bored.
brother?
I'm live.
We
But,
raised you, we fed you, we gave you everything you ever needed, and you repay us with this
oh,
psychotic
what?
display of jealousy." I did not flinch. I stood perfectly
W
still,
mod.
letting her shrill voice echo off the gilded ceiling. "This family is the absolute pride of this community." Beatrice continued, her chest heaving as she gestured wildly to the gathered crowd. "We sit on the
You don't have
charity
Discord audio,
boards.
so you're just talking to
We
me.
fund the
No, I
hospital
turned it
wings.
down.
We are a pillar of
Okay, there we
Atlanta.
go. Yeah.
And you drag your rented thugs in here to spew filthy, disgusting lies just because you could never measure up to Jamal. You are nothing but a dropout, a failure. You will never be a Marcus." I let her finish. I let her harsh, desperate words hang in the air, allowing the entire ballroom to absorb the sheer magnitude
I
of
think
her
your call
delusion.
command's wrong.
When
Yeah,
she finally
I
ran
can
out of
edit
breath,
it.
leaving a heavy, ringing silence in her wake, I turned to my right. A waiter stood frozen nearby, holding a silver tray loaded with fresh
So I had
drinks.
Cap and Nahan,
I
like,
reached
they're
out and
here,
gracefully
but
plucked a crystal
we're not.
champagne flute from the tray. With my other
Yeah,
hand, I
add
took a
them.
silver stirring spoon. I looked directly into my mother's furious eyes and tapped the spoon against the crystal. Ding, ding, ding. The sharp, clear sound demanded absolute attention, cutting through the tension
Bro,
like a
HCM must
surgical blade.
always yap.
The pride of the community. I repeated, my voice perfectly calm and devoid of any emotion. "That is a beautiful sentiment, Beatrice. Truly inspiring. But since you are so deeply concerned with the prestige and honor of the
Go ahead,
Marcus
see you later.
family, I think it is only fair that we show your esteemed guests exactly how that pride is being funded." I gave a fractional nod to Elena. Elena's fingers flew across the digital interface of her tablet.
Is that how it
Instantly,
works?
the massive presentation
Yes.
screens
Yeah.
flanking
I
the
did it.
main stage shifted.
I did my job.
The humiliating images of Chloe's declined credit cards vanished. In their place, a complex, sprawling web of internal banking documents appeared. High-definition scans of wire transfers, offshore account routing numbers, and certified audit logs illuminated the ballroom with a harsh, unforgiving light. What you are looking at, ladies and gentlemen, are the unredacted internal ledgers of Marcus Wealth Management. I announced, projecting my voice so that it reached
Yo,
every
Jacob,
single
shut
corner of
up.
the
No,
massive
it wasn't.
room.
Stop
For the
lying.
past 4 years, my brother has been running a highly sophisticated Ponzi scheme. He did not just leverage his own
He's probably
future,
in a rank
he
war
Never
today.
ever
leveraged
talk
yours.
bad about.
A low
No,
murmur of confusion rippled
Oh,
through the crowd, but I did not stop to let them process it.
I would
I
never
struck
talk
hard and
bad about
fast.
J
To
one
pay
two
for
three or
Chloe's
whatever.
rented diamonds, my mother's exorbitant country club dues, and his own fleet of European supercars, Jamal has been systematically siphoning money from your private trust accounts, I stated, my tone ruthless and precise. Elena tapped her screen again. The display zoomed in on specific highlighted transactions. Names began to appear on the screen in massive bold text. The
what?
names of the very
What's
people
up?
standing in this room.
Diego.
The truth is, ladies and gentlemen, the golden boy of this family stole your retirement funds to buy his luxury vehicles. I continued, pointing toward the screens. Look at the dates. Look at the routing numbers. The $300,000 missing from Judge Sterling's pension fund was wired directly to a shell company in the Cayman Islands before being used to purchase a customized Ferrari. The $500,000 drained from the Atlanta Children's Charity Endowment was used to secure a down payment on a Buckhead estate that Jamal and Chloe are currently in escrow on. He is not a financial genius. He is a common thief who used your hard-earned wealth as his personal piggy bank. The ballroom exploded. It was no longer a crowd of shocked elite spectators. It
Alright, someone's
instantly
gotta
transformed into a mob of furious, panicked
mute HT
victims.
for like
The polished veneer
20
of high
seconds.
society completely vanished. Men in expensive tuxedos began shouting, pointing at the screens and demanding answers. Women gasped, dropping their glasses to the floor and pulling out their phones to desperately call their
Never
bank
mind.
managers. The sheer visceral outrage vibrating through the room was deafening. I watched as an aging real estate mogul shoved his way through the crowd, grabbing Jamal by the collar of his ruined suit. "Where is my money, you parasite?" The old man roared, spit flying from his lips, before two other guests pulled him back. Jamal did not fight back. He slid down the
You
marble
just like
pillar,
hand out
his
free
knees
VIPs
completely
or
giving
something.
out until he was
No,
sitting on the
everyone
floor.
has 100k channel
He
points for
buried
some
his face in
reason.
his hands, his shoulders
Oh wait,
shaking.
it's an actual reward.
The arrogant
It
titan of
is.
finance was gone, reduced to a
I
trembling,
don't know,
pathetic
people would just
fraud.
be gambling
Chloe
like
was backing
crazy.
away from him, her eyes wide with terror. She realized with
How
crushing
many
clarity
times
that
do you
she was
have
not
gambles
married
on
to a
here?
wealthy aristocrat.
I don't know.
She was shackled to a man facing decades in federal prison. She frantically reached up and unclasped the rented diamond necklace from her throat,
Why
letting
would
the
you redeem
jewels drop to the
VIP?
marble floor
Already
as
have
if they were
VIP.
burning her skin. She wanted absolutely nothing to do with the sinking ship she had proudly captained only minutes ago. Beatrice stood completely paralyzed. The women she had spent decades trying to impress the socialites she had just been bragging to were now glaring at her with pure, unadulterated hatred. She opened her mouth to speak, to spin another lie to defend her son, but no sound came out.
Now, Jay, you gotta
The
add
evidence was
more
undeniable.
rewards.
It was displayed in
I added
massive,
like I think I
high-definition
had like
letters
30
right
or
above her
something in
head.
mind.
Her
Oh,
entire
You
world,
gotta
her
go
precious
crazy.
legacy was burning to the ground, and she was standing right
No,
in
I
the
gotta
center of the
focus up.
flames. Then
Wait.
Marcus stepped forward.
Oh.
My father had been silent for years, choosing the path of least resistance, enabling my mother's cruelty, and blindly trusting Jamal's fabricated success. He was a man who valued the illusion of victory over the reality of integrity. And as he walked toward his ruined son, it became glaringly obvious that his mind had completely fractured under the weight of the truth. He simply could not process the catastrophic reality crashing down around him. He refused to acknowledge the screaming investors. He ignored the federal bank logs glowing on the screens. He completely blocked out the fact that I had just orchestrated his family's absolute destruction. Marcus knelt down on the marble floor beside Jamal. His hands were shaking violently, but his face was set in a mask of vacant, terrifying denial. He placed a trembling hand on Jamal's shoulder, pulling his weeping son into a stiff embrace. "It is okay, son," Marcus said, his voice quavering but desperately loud enough for the furious crowd to hear. "Do not worry about these people. Do not worry about any of this." Jamal looked up at his father, his face streaked with tears, his expression a mixture of confusion and absolute despair. "Tomorrow we sign the contract with Aura Health." Marcus continued, his eyes wide and completely unhinged as he patted Jamal's back. We will get the $15 million advance. We will just use the new money to pay all these people back. The CEO of Aura Health believes in you, Jamal. Everything will be fine. Just wait until tomorrow. I watched my father cling to his favorite delusion. He was stroking Jamal's shoulder, smoothing the wrinkled fabric of his ruined
I can't
suit,
play that.
and repeating the name Aura Health, like a magical incantation. He firmly believed that some faceless billionaire was going to descend from the clouds and wash away the sins of the Marcus family with a massive influx of corporate cash. He was a man who valued the illusion of victory over the reality of integrity, and his mind had completely fractured under the weight of the truth. I did not speak right away. I let the absolute absurdity of his hope settle over the silent ballroom. The investors were watching this pathetic display, their anger temporarily suspended by morbid curiosity. A slow, genuine smile spread across my face. I tilted my head, looking down at the two men trembling on the marble floor. Tomorrow, I repeated softly, tasting the word. You think salvation is coming tomorrow? Marcus glared up at me, his eyes swimming with a mixture of terror and stubborn pride. Yes, he spat, his voice trembling. The acquisition is finalized. Jamal has been negotiating with the founder for months. They are signing the papers at 9 in the morning. You cannot stop it, Zuri. You cannot touch that deal. My smile widened into something lethal. I raised my hand and signaled toward the main stage at the far end of the ballroom. Instantly, a single blinding spotlight cut through the dim ambiance, illuminating the center of the stage. The heavy velvet curtains parted with a quiet mechanical hum. A tall, distinguished man in a dark charcoal suit stepped into the light. He carried a thick, leather-bound document folder under his right arm. He walked down the stage steps with purposeful, measured strides, the rhythmic click of his shoes echoing in the cavernous space. The crowd parted for him instinctively, sensing the shift in power. He came to a stop right beside Dr. Andre, forming a solid wall of authority behind me. Jamal, I said, my voice dropping to a deadly calm register. I believe you already know Jonathan Vance. Jamal swallowed hard, staring at the man. The arrogant titan of wealth management was gone, reduced to a trembling, pathetic fraud. He is the chief legal counsel for Aura Health. Jamal croaked, his confusion deepening. He is the proxy. He is here to deliver the advance. Jonathan Vance did not smile. He looked down at Jamal with the clinical detachment of a man examining an insect. He opened the leather folder and withdrew a thick stack of legal documents printed on heavy cream paper. The final acquisition contract. Mr. Marcus Jonathan said, his voice booming with practiced legal projection. I am indeed here to represent Aura Health. However, I am not a proxy. I am simply fulfilling my duty as corporate counsel by facilitating the final directives of my employer. Jonathan turned completely toward me. He bowed his head slightly, extending the contract toward my waiting hands. Ladies and gentlemen, Jonathan announced, addressing the entire ballroom, but keeping his eyes fixed respectfully on me. Please allow me to formally introduce the sole founder, chairman, and chief executive officer of Aura Health, Ms. Zuri. The words dropped like physical weights onto the marble floor. For 5 full seconds, nobody took a breath. The silence was so profound it felt like the oxygen had been sucked out of the room. The reality of the statement collided with the fabricated narrative my family had desperately clung to for years. The sheer impossibility of it paralyzed them completely. Beatrice let out a high-pitched wheezing sound, as if she had been punched in the throat. She stumbled backward, her knees buckling slightly until she caught herself against a cocktail table. Her hands flew to her mouth, her eyes bulging as she stared at me. Marcus froze. His hand stopped moving on Jamal's shoulder. His jaw went slack. The delusion he had been using to shield himself shattered into a million irreparable pieces. But Jamal was the masterpiece. He looked up at me from the floor, his face drained of all blood. His lips parted, but no sound emerged. The man who had spent his entire life stepping on my neck suddenly realized that the invisible billionaire he had been begging for salvation was the very sister he had discarded. He realized the encrypted emails, the late-night conference calls, The rigorous demands for internal financial audits leading up to the acquisition were all engineered by me. I was the one who demanded full transparency into his accounts as a condition of the deal. I was the one who legally compelled him to hand over the ledgers that exposed his Ponzi scheme. Jamal breathed a single tear of pure terror spilling over his eyelashes. It was you. You set the trap. I took the thick contract from Jonathan Vance. It felt heavy and satisfying in my hands. You wanted to buy me and my miserable life with Aura Health money, I said, my voice echoing clearly through the dead silent room. You spent the last 6 months groveling for my capital. You opened your books. You gave me the keys to your entire fraudulent empire because you were too blinded by your own greed to realize who held the leash. I looked down at the contract, the culmination of his pathetic hopes. Let me save you the trouble of waiting until tomorrow, Jamal. I gripped the top of the thick document and ripped it sharply down the middle. The sound of tearing paper was deafening. I tore it again, dropping the shredded pieces of his salvation onto the floor right over his expensive Italian shoes.
Oh,
Deal canceled, I stated coldly. Jamal let out a ragged sob, clutching his chest as if his heart had physically stopped. He slumped entirely forward, his forehead resting against the cold marble, completely
Divine.
broken. But I was not finished. Oh, and one more detail I added, smoothing the front of my crimson silk gown. I did not just
wait,
invite your
I can't
investors
do it.
tonight. I also shared your internal ledgers with a
Oh.
few federal friends of mine. They were highly intrigued by your creative accounting methods.
It didn't even work.
Jamal's head
I
snapped
tried.
up, his eyes wild with fresh panic.
I don't know.
You
Like,
see,
my
Jamal?
IT doesn't work.
The
Oh, it's 'cause
FBI
I
is not coming
unbinded
to
my
audit you
IT
next week,
on
I
Tool
said, leaning
Springs.
down
Wait,
slightly,
yeah.
so my words would strike with maximum impact.
I think I unbinded my
They are
IT
waiting in
on
the
Tool
lobby
Springs.
downstairs right now. They have a
Wait,
warrant
so
for
that
your
means
arrest for
I would
wire
have to
fraud
be-
embezzlement and grand larceny.
Wait, no.
The hotel security locked down the elevators 5 minutes ago. There is no way out. At the mention of the FBI, the final remnants of the Marcus
Yeah.
family facade collapsed. Chloe, who had been pressing
Wait,
herself
okay.
against a far wall, let out a panicked shriek. She hiked up the skirt of her designer dress,
Yeah.
kicked off her high heels, and sprinted blindly toward the
wait,
service
where's the
exit
inputs?
behind the
Yeah.
kitchen, completely abandoning her husband. She shoved past waiters and guests,
What if I just-
vanishing through the swinging
Okay.
doors in a desperate attempt to save herself. Marcus
don't know
dropped
what
to his
to-
knees beside his ruined son. The patriarch of the family buried his face in his hands, weeping loudly and uncontrollably right in front of the very society he had worshipped.
Yeah.
Beatrice slowly slid down the side of the cocktail table. Her perfectly styled
No,
hair
'cause-
fell out of place
so
as she
it's,
collapsed onto the
I'm not
floor,
double binding.
sitting in a puddle of
But if
spilled
I do
champagne.
this, I'm like technically
She
double
stared
binding.
blankly at the shredded contract scattered across the marble, entirely catatonic. I stood tall above the wreckage of my family, surrounded by my security detail, my brilliant chief medical officer, and my chief legal counsel. I surveyed the
hold up.
ballroom, watching
Let me
the
F3I
investors
this
pull out their
fossil.
phones to call their attorneys,
Oh,
and the
yeah, let's
socialites
go.
whisper furiously about the greatest scandal of the decade. I turned my back on Jamal Marcus and Beatrice, leaving them to face the sirens that were already beginning to wail in the distance outside the hotel. I did not feel an ounce of pity. I felt absolutely nothing but the sweet, clean rush of justice. The wail of the sirens was the last thing
so I was
Jamal
getting, like,
heard as a
0
free man.
BTs.
The federal
then now I'm
agents were
getting
waiting in
outpoints
the
at
grand
them,
lobby just as I had
makes sense.
promised. There was no dignity in his arrest. He was
Yeah, so
dragged
listen,
out
when
in
I
his
joined, I
ruined
didn't get
custom
any
suit,
BTs for, like,
crying and protesting his innocence to a crowd of
minutes or
stunned
something.
hotel guests and snapping smartphone cameras. The swiftness of the justice
Yeah, it
system, when
is.
motivated by furious
like, no
billionaires
BT
and
for 7
irrefutable
minutes.
digital evidence, is truly something to behold. The trial was a mere formality. The financial trail Elena and I had compiled was airtight, detailing every stolen dollar and every forged document. Jamal Marcus, the golden child, the untouchable titan of Atlanta finance, was sentenced to 20 years in a federal penitentiary. The man who had spent his life stepping on my neck was now reduced to an inmate number, stripped of his designer suits and his
130 something.
manufactured pride. Chloe did exactly what a parasite does when its host begins to die. She detached. Less than 48 hours after Jamal was denied bail, she filed for divorce. She cited irreconcilable differences and publicly claimed complete ignorance of his financial crimes, playing the role of the deceived victim. She
Oh,
packed her designer bags,
let's scare
leaving
her,
behind
please.
the unpaid rent on their
Dude,
luxury
I'm so
condo
bad.
and a swarm of furious creditors. She vanished into the ether, fleeing back to whatever shadows she came from. I heard rumors she tried to reinvent herself in Miami hunting for a new mark, but the stench of the Marcus scandal followed her everywhere. She was toxic, a social pariah stripped of the old money illusion she so desperately craved. Her wealthy friends, the women she had tried to impress by mocking me, immediately blocked her number and publicly distanced themselves. Marcus and Beatrice faced a different kind of prison. Their descent was a slow, agonizing public execution of their ego. To keep Jamal afloat during his desperate final months, Marcus had quietly mortgaged their Beacon Hill estate. He had taken a massive high-interest loan from a private equity firm, entirely unaware that the firm was a subsidiary of my own holding company. When Jamal's accounts were frozen by the federal government, the loan defaulted
I think I have to do
immediately.
this.
The foreclosure was
I
swift,
have
clinical,
to,
and
on
legally
this,
absolute.
I need split
I did not
rewind,
send them an
triggers
eviction
eye.
notice or gloat over their ruin.
Okay,
I
then.
simply let the bank do its
Yeah.
job. Watching my parents lose their status was like watching a lavish theater set collapse to reveal the cheap, rotting scaffolding behind it. They were stripped of their country club memberships. Their wealthy friends, terrified of being associated with federal wire fraud and public disgrace, stopped returning their calls and crossed the street to avoid them. But the final, most devastating blow came from their church. For decades, Beatrice had used her front row pew as a throne, judging the congregation and parading her false righteousness. When the full extent of Jamal's theft from the community became
I don't
public,
understand
including
how I
the
have
fact
11
that he had
NP.
siphoned money from the
feels
church's
like I have
own
like
charity
4.
endowment, the congregation revolted. They were formally asked by the church elders not to return. The community they had ruled over cast them out, completely disgusted by their profound hypocrisy and the stolen money that had funded their grand charitable donations. They were forced to downsize into a cramped
I
two-bedroom
guess I was just
apartment
getting
on the
like
industrial outskirts of the city.
like
It was a
yesterday I had
sterile, unforgiving
14,
space with
and then the day
paper-thin
before I
walls
had
and cheap
16,
linoleum
so
floors. They had no savings, no retirement, and absolutely no social capital left to exploit. Marcus, once a commanding patriarch, withered into a silent, broken man who spent his days staring blankly at the television, unable to process his spectacular failure.
all my mods are in the
Beatrice,
call.
who had spent her entire life looking down her nose at the working class, was now trapped in the very
All my
existence
what?
she had relentlessly mocked. They were ghosts in their own lives,
Do I have a
drowning in the
lot?
crushing
Like, I don't
reality
have
of
it
their
on my
total
screen.
alienation. My own life
Yeah,
moved
10,000
forward with
for
sharp,
you.
brilliant clarity.
140?
Aura Health expanded globally,
Oh, yeah,
revolutionizing the
140
medical
people
technology
Quite a lot.
sector.
billing RSG.
I was no longer the unwanted
Bruh.
daughter or the family scapegoat. I was a self-made titan. I had excised the rot from my life and built an empire on a foundation of unshakable truth and relentless hard
There's
work.
like
I surrounded myself
1,000
with people
people
who
watching
valued
Sky
loyalty and
Carnation
brilliance over fabricated blood
on
ties.
RSG.
But the past has a strange habit of clawing its way back to the surface when you least expect it. It happened on a cold, rain-slicked Tuesday evening about 8 months after the ballroom gala. I was stepping out of my private elevator into the gleaming marble lobby of my residential high-rise. The air was crisp, smelling of expensive
I have
lilies
a
and
final
polished stone.
tomorrow, but can't
My
sleep.
security detail flanked me, automatically
I'm
adjusting
looking.
their positions as we moved toward the glass exit doors where my car was waiting. That was when I heard the voice. It was a cracked, desperate sound, completely devoid of the sharp, aristocratic edge it used to carry. Zuri, please. I stopped and turned slowly. Standing near the concierge desk, dripping wet from the rain and clutching a frayed trench coat tightly around her shoulders, was Beatrice. She looked a decade older. Her hair, once perfectly styled and meticulously colored, was limp and graying heavily at the roots. The designer bags under her eyes were dark and prominent, and she was shaking uncontrollably in the air-conditioned lobby. The concierge, a strict professional, was already signaling for building security to remove the unauthorized visitor. I raised a single hand, silently instructing him to stop. Beatrice took a hesitant, trembling step toward me. Tears were freely streaming down her deeply lined face, cutting through the rainwater. She did not look like a matriarch. She looked like a beggar. Please, Zuri,
What the hell is your problem?
she sobbed, her voice breaking as she collapsed
It's
to her
my
knees on
problem?
the cold marble floor right in front of me. I am so sorry. We have
I
nothing
don't
left.
have any
We cannot pay the
problems.
rent this month. Your father is sick and we cannot afford his medication. Please, you have so much. Just a little help. I am begging you. Forgive me. I looked down at the woman kneeling on the polished marble
26.
floor.
Crafting table,
From my
22.
vantage point, the power dynamic that had
26,
defined my
18.
entire existence was
18
visibly
plus
completely
6
inverted. Beatrice was no longer the imposing
I
matriarch
understand.
who ruled from the head of a formal dining table. She was a frail, shivering woman, drowning in the consequences of her own horrific choices. The rain dripped from the hem of her cheap coat, forming a muddy puddle over the pristine stone. The concierge caught my eye, silently asking if he should intervene. I gave him a fractional shake of my head.
That's where I
I
always
needed
mess
to
up my
finish
2 by
this
1 when I have
myself.
a diamond pick
Zuri,
and a gold
please,
shovel.
Beatrice
This
choked
is like
out.
mine's
She lunged
much
forward, reaching
quicker
out with
and
desperate, trembling hands. Her cold, wet fingers clamped around my wrist. Her grip was surprisingly strong, fueled by absolute sheer panic. I know I was wrong. I know we made terrible mistakes. We were blinded by Jamal.
Ooh.
We thought he was building a legacy for us, but he ruined us. You are the only one who survived. You have to help me. You have to help your father. I stared at her hands clinging to my sleeve.
Oh my
I
god.
felt no anger. I felt no vindictive thrill or surge of triumph. The fiery rage that had propelled me through the last 5 years had completely burned out, leaving behind nothing but a vast clinical emptiness. I was looking at a stranger. I am your mother, Zuri.
Yeah.
Beatrice sobbed, her voice echoing shrilly in the cavernous lobby. She looked up at me, her eyes wide and red-rimmed, searching my face for the
Like, a
obedient,
week.
desperate daughter she had spent decades terrorizing.
ordered mine the
I
other
gave you
day,
life.
and it's
You
predicted to
cannot
come
just leave
in
us to rot in that horrible
mid-June.
place. The blood
Oh,
flowing
what?
in us is one. We are
I
family.
guess like when I
I
bought
let her
mine,
words hang in the
there
air.
was a lot of stock.
I let the silence stretch out
Yes,
until
an
the only
estimated,
sound was the soft hum of the
delivery date is
building's
gonna be
climate
the
control
21st to
and
the
the ragged,
26th
harsh
of
sound of
June,
her
and I
breathing.
think that's crazy.
Blood,
gonna-
I repeated softly.
Are you gonna say
My
it's
voice
in
was
stock,
perfectly
but say,
level,
"Hey, no, we
devoid of
actually have to
any
ship it to
warmth
our
or
warehouse,
malice.
and that's gonna take a month."
You invoke blood now.
Which is just
I
crazy.
looked deeply into her eyes, refusing to let her look away. I watched the frantic,
Did you get,
desperate
like,
hope
one of the
flickering in her
expensive ones,
gaze.
like,
Yeah.
with, like-
She truly believed that the biological technicality of my birth
My wedding
would
is
be
so
enough to
expensive,
erase a
but I
lifetime
like
of
it.
psychological warfare.
I
She
know, I just got the
believed that
plastic one 'cause
maternal
that's the
guilt was a
only-
magic
that's the only
key
one I can
that would
afford.
unlock my vault
Yeah.
and save her from the poverty she so deeply despised. I gently raised my arm and deliberately pried her cold fingers off my wrist one by one. I stepped back, creating a physical boundary
Bro,
between
why are you
us.
so mean to
Do
me?
you remember the night I
I
was in
do.
the emergency room? Beatrice, I asked. My tone was conversational, but it carried a weight that made her flinch. I was 22 years old. My body was shutting
need to,
down
like,
from
see y'all
stress
fight
and
in the
exhaustion
land.
because I had been working 3 jobs just to
Okay,
keep a
I
roof
don't
over my
need it.
head
I don't
after
need
you
a
threw me
app.
out. I called you from a hospital bed. I was terrified. I thought I was going to die. I asked you for a loan to cover my
Sorry, I
medical
cracked that
bills.
boat break.
Do you remember what you said to me? Beatrice swallowed hard. The color drained entirely from her face, leaving her looking sickly and pale. I did not know it was that serious, Zuri. I thought you were just... You thought I was seeking attention.
I'll take that as a
I
no.
finished for her. You thought my suffering was an inconvenience to your dinner party schedule. I leaned down slightly, bridging the
Am I
gap
going?
between us so she could hear every single syllable with absolute
sucks.
clarity.
He's gonna win.
Dude,
I looked
okay.
at the woman who had birthed
Fine.
me,
I
and I
literally
handed
only
her
have a
back the
pickaxe.
exact weapon she had used to break me all those years ago. Enough, I said, my voice dropping
My
to a
name's too
harsh,
long, I'm
icy
shortening
whisper. Stop acting and go get a job. Beatrice gasped. It was as if I had
needs
physically
tools.
struck her. She recoiled, clutching her chest, her eyes widening
the
in absolute
bastion.
horror as
I
she
like it, they're
recognized her
fucking-
own vicious words being weaponized against her. The realization hit her with the force of a freight train. There was no hidden reservoir of daughterly affection left to exploit. There was no mercy. There was nothing. I straightened my posture, pulling my coat tighter around my shoulders. I turned my head toward the security guard standing quietly by the desk. Please escort this woman off the premises, I instructed smoothly. She is no longer welcome in this building. Zuri, no. Beatrice screamed, scrambling to get her footing on the slick marble. Her voice tore through the quiet elegance of the lobby, a raw, jagged sound of total despair.
Oh my god.
You
I
cannot
have
do this.
nothing.
I am your mother. You owe me. I turned my back to her. My heels clicked rhythmically against the stone as I walked directly toward the private
Oh.
elevators. I did not increase my pace. I
Hey.
did not rush.
Okay.
I
it's
walked
over.
with the slow, measured stride of a woman who completely owned her space. Behind me, the security guards were already moving in, lifting Beatrice by the
Yeah,
arms
my
and
inventory
guiding her
was actually
firmly toward the
cooked 'cause I didn't
revolving
have
glass doors.
Any tools?
She was thrashing, crying out my name, begging, pleading,
Then I ran
demanding.
out of blocks.
Her
Too.
voice cracked,
You don't know
bouncing off
anything
the
about
high
having
ceilings.
tools.
A pathetic, chaotic symphony
Yeah, I don't.
of a woman realizing she had finally permanently lost. I reached the elevator bank and pressed the call button. The polished chrome door slid open instantly with a soft
6,
chime.
7,
I stepped inside and turned around to face the lobby one last time. Through the closing gap of the elevator doors, I saw Beatrice being pushed out into the dark, freezing rain. She was fighting against the guards, her face contorted in a mask of grief and fury. But the heavy reinforced glass doors of the lobby
Next
swung
person to
shut,
type into
sealing
this
her
chat is getting
outside.
banned.
Her screams were
Dude,
instantly
what?
muted, reduced to nothing but a faint, muffled
You guys-
vibration
Mod
against the
abuse.
thick glass.
Are you actually mod?
The elevator doors
Yeah,
slid
he is.
perfectly shut, completely obscuring her from my view. The silence inside the steel cabin was absolute. It was a profound, heavy silence that wrapped around me like a protective
Yeah, now we're
blanket.
kidding.
There was no more
W-
screaming.
W-
There were no more expectations. There was no more
Why
toxic
is
guilt
this
or fabricated obligations. As the elevator engaged, pulling me smoothly upward toward my penthouse, I took a slow, deep
I
breath.
would ban them.
The tension that had lived in my shoulders for my entire life finally
So,
Why
dissolved.
did I not
Next video.
place?
The cord was cut. The past was dead. I had severed the rotten limb and cauterized the wound.
Can't,
I
like,
was
the lead
ascending to the
mod,
life
like,
I had
remove
built with my
mod
own
from
hands
other
entirely
mods?
on my
Yeah.
own
Can you
Can you make
terms.
me lead mod?
I did not look back. Look.
I'm not making